Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition and another week of the most disruptive show covering news, events, and politics from across our disunited states and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. I hope you're having an absolutely wonderful one. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were more than 16,616 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. That's the fewest we've seen in the U.S. since June of last year, with just under 780 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 33,041 cases per day. That's a decrease of 33% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 37% of the American public has been fully vaccinated at this point, and 47% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, to give you the total numbers, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,967,350 people across the United States and killed about 585,570 people. The country of Thailand has recorded its highest daily total of COVID infections since the pandemic began, with 9,635 new infections on Monday, most of those new cases occurring among prisoners. Upwards of three-quarters of those cases, almost 10,000 in Thailand, occurring among the prisoner population. In the United Kingdom, the UK has significantly eased lockdowns in England, Wales, and most of Scotland as cases reached another low milestone on the roadmap out of the pandemic. Two areas of Scotland, Glasgow and Moray, will not have their lockdowns lifted, as case numbers there are still at local highs. In national political news here in the States, today is the deadline for taxes in America, with taxes due over a month late as a part of the response to the pandemic. And 80% of stations are still out of gas in Washington, D.C. That's almost 40% of stations in Virginia that are out, and about a third out of gas in Maryland. This is all part of the response to the Colonial Pipeline ransomware breach. After the pipeline, basically over 5,500 miles of it, got shut down, stretching from New York to the eastern, across much of the eastern seaboard. This led to panic buying on the part of people driving cars looking to stock up on gas, and it has only laggingly ended at this point, as the pipeline was rebooted mid last week, and it takes time for the oil to get flowing again. Anyway, prices for gas across the nation are the highest you would have seen in over 7 years. Since 2014 is the date given for the last time. We'll see if they get up higher than that. In international news, Sunday was the deadliest day yet in the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with more than 3,000 rockets fired by Palestinian forces so far, as over 40 Palestinians were killed by Israel on Sunday. That's out of upwards of 180 Palestinians killed so far in total. Around 10 Israelis have been killed over that. Israel has said it destroyed upwards of 9 miles of tunnels that were used by Hamas and Palestinian militants on Sunday. The country of Chile's center-right ruling coalition has failed to secure a majority, as the country is now in the process of drafting a new constitution. Candidates backed by the ruling coalition secured only a fifth of the votes, with independent parties taking in most of the vote total. And again, this goes as they attempt to redraft their constitution. And in South Korea, the wife of the Belgium ambassador in South Korea has invoked diplomatic immunity after allegedly slapping a shop employee in Seoul, the capital. An employee was questioning her over suspected shoplifting. The woman had previously been hospitalized after suffering a stroke. Anyway, those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are going into a break. Well, no, we're not. We're going into the sound effect. Coming right back. See, I'm still, we stuck with that for the longest time. And then, you know exactly what I'm talking about, Jamarl, with the sound effect for the headline segment. Real long-term listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about. We got rid of it, and now I'm still struggling to get used to having it back in again. Although we're back in the studio. It's another week, our second week back in the studio, Jamarl. It's exciting.
It is exciting. It is exciting. No clue what you mean on the sound effect thing. We've had the sound effect this way for the last year.
We have, but then we changed it for a while.
I'm teasing.
We got rid of it for a bit.
I'm totally teasing. It's like, what? What are you talking about?
What do I do again here? This isn't a break.
Just this destruction of reality by one individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sound effect thing is a little weird, but it's okay. We're back at it, and we're back at the helm. We're actually not just back at the helm for the first time. And we have a new producer.
We
The
do.
world is opening up.
Austin.
Yes.
Hi. I can, yes.
Yes.
And we can wave to our producers in the
wave
studio
to our
again. We're back all in
producer.
person. It's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. They could see us. They could see us. It's awesome. So that last story, man, I hate to laugh at stuff like that, but it is kind of funny, right? It's like, no, I know from a human level, it's unfortunate. And nobody should behave in this way, meaning you should not slap one of the employees of a store if they're questioning you because they believe that you've stolen something. By the same token, a Belgium ambassador that is in South Korea invoking diplomatic immunity.
His wife.
The wife.
Because she slapped somebody after being accused of
Yes.
shoplifting.
Right.
And then I would laugh
so
at her.
Wild.
I would not feel at all abashed or ashamed about laughing at her, except she had a stroke recently.
Who
And so
did? The shopkeeper?
wife, exactly. And so that
Wait. The wife or the shopkeeper?
the wife. If the shopkeeper had a stroke, that would just add insult to injury or whatever. That would
Yeah.
make it even worse for her to slap him. But
No, that makes it funny. I'm not saying that it's funny that the woman had a stroke.
no, but she claimed diplomatic immunity to get out of
That part.
That's the part.
That's
yeah.
the part. That's funny. How do you slap somebody? Like, if you claim diplomatic immunity because something happened that's, I don't know, governmental. Okay, fair enough. If you claim diplomatic immunity because there's some kind of misunderstanding and you're trying to, I don't know, smuggle a baby out of a country that's about to be assassinated by drug gangs. I don't know. But not slapping the shopkeeper. And not even the person, the wife. Does the wife get diplomatic immunity like that? I mean, what happened to the British cat? The one who wife hit the person. Harry
Dunn was the one who was killed.
Yes, that's what it was.
Anna Sekulis, I believe, was her name.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then bailed. And then come to find out she was like a spy or something.
She was her own intelligence.
Yeah, it was
exactly.
very bizarre stuff.
It is weird.
Do wives get diplomatic immunity like
Yes.
that? So I was married.
Yeah.
And I went into a foreign country. My wife, who knits, she knits for a living. That's all she does. She knits. If she slaps a shopkeeper, she's covered in the diplomatic immunity.
Well, she has those knitting needles. Those are dangerous tools at a certain point, Jamarl.
I know, but you're basically saying those dangerous tools, she still could get off.
Yeah.
Wow.
Or a car ticket. That's a lot more convenient.
A car ticket.
A lot more random people get car tickets than slap people.
Slapping,
Is
right.
my thinking.
Right.
Thankfully,
That puts you in the
thanks
mind
to
of like one of
civilization.
those old rap video things, like where like what was it, Puff Daddy or somebody hit somebody with a phone or something, where it's like a diva move, where the person is just like, how dare you
Yeah.
say that I am shoplifting this trinket? Pop. That's extreme, man.
It is.
That is extreme.
It is. Well, and did you ever see Breaking Bad?
I don't know. If
I'm even
Breaking
spacing
Bad.
on her name.
Yes,
but
Breaking
the
Bad.
sister
Yes.
who's a shoplifter, and like the pettiness of her. That's where that makes my mind go. Anyway, that was the last. Big news over the weekend is what the big news was late last week, which is the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
I thought you were going to say a UFO thing.
What'd you say?
I thought you were going to say the UFO thing.
Oh no, no, you're heading there. You're bringing
That's
that.
my head. Yeah.
You're bringing that in, and you're doing your monologue.
No.
Right?
I'm gonna hold that. I'm gonna hold that. I'm gonna wait until we get somebody on where we can talk about it.
Dave Beatty.
Yeah, I hope Beatty could come on. Beatty would be a good guy to come on. Beatty was the one who initially released the video that everybody is talking about with the USS Kid. That's the one where everybody was like, I think there was all sorts of documents on it. You had the Pentagon that basically says, yes, this is true, the videos that were released. So Beatty was the one who initially put the video out, or put the leak out. And then people started looking into it, and that's when you have other videos that were leaked and everything
And they
else.
forgot about him.
Yeah.
They brushed right over.
Yeah, they
the fact
ignored
that
the guy.
Yeah, he was the originator of it.
He was the originator of it. And they blew past them, and it was like, hey, look at this other debate. Who's like, I'm still here.
Yeah.
I have leaks. There are people who I know. And he does. He did. He was right. So he would be great to have on about it. He's far more into the investigatory and the open mind aspect of the stuff.
Well, because he does documentaries.
Yeah,
and
he does documentaries.
That's part of you. We've had him on the show once, and I say we, but really it was you who interviewed him. And part of what caught my eye is that this dude is not just he's not just good for talking to about it. He doesn't just know what he's talking about in that sense. He's put in the time to create like media packets, actual documentaries that you can watch on YouTube.
He sent us documentation about like the ship logs.
Mm-hmm.
In fact,
and interviews with a lot of key people.
That's right. Interviews with key people. But one of the interesting things that Beatty made the point about is saying, look, this wasn't just something that was happening over the course of a week. This was happening over the course of a month. And then you find out in the documentation that came on from 60 Minutes, and this was over a year. These guys had gotten the current, like, look, a lot of, Shane and I was talking about this morning. There's a lot of weird stuff going on with us. I mean, they are basically saying that, yes, our pilots saw stuff all the time. Like not once or twice or all the time, that they got accustomed to seeing things. And it's like, wait a minute, what do you mean you got accustomed to seeing stuff? And then it's like, well, if this is our technology or if this is not our technology, then, you know, we're screwed. However, it looks different, so we don't consider it a threat. Like that stuff. And Shane was like, that sounds weird. Now, if you grew up, though, believing that UFOs weren't real, and you were told that, oh, that's conspiracy theory, and you even knew that if you mentioned it, you could lose your job or at the very least lose your ability to fly because they were like, there's something wrong with him. He's seeing stuff in the air. Like, if you get into your headspace of, okay, this is not something we talk about, you wouldn't say anything. And this is the Lou Elizondo stuff, when he's like, yeah, man, the secrecy stuff, we need to get rid of the secrecy stuff, the giggle factor, etc. And he keeps pushing on this thing of like, if this is somebody else on this planet, we should know about that. Like, let's say, take the UFO stuff off. Say it's not that. Say God put this planet in a vase, just in a crystal vase. Nothing else is here. Something else, some other technology. What do you do with that? Do you ignore it or do you respond to it? And part of the reason that the Pentagon is being investigated now by the Inspector General is because of that. It's, wait a minute. You guys were seeing this all the time and you didn't say anything about this? Like, it's that part, because that's the part that's you know, problematic, to put it mildly. Let's say you didn't know what it was. Isn't that even more of a reason to try to figure it out? Like, that's their issue that they're going into it. So CBS, 60 Minutes, all of these guys are reporting on it. I applaud them for hitting it. I mean, I don't know how you can't hit it at this point. But yeah, you're right. That wasn't the biggest story. I mean, I guess it was one story. I mean, this has been a weird year. I guess starting off from the COVID stuff, where you have, in one case, a country or a place being flattened with military force. And then on the other part, 60 Minutes is talking about UFOs.
Yeah.
How weird.
It is.
Very, very weird.
It is weird. Well, we're also in a bit of a weird news cycle right now. And I'll put it like this. I don't feel like anything like, I guess there technically were slow news days under Trump, but it felt like there was always some scandal. It felt like there was always
some tweet.
Yeah, there was always some tweet or some ongoing investigation or some inquiry or some, impeachment, whatever it was. There was always something going on. Now you have occasional lulls. And despite the ongoing deadly conflict in not Myanmar, not, technically kind of the other side of the world, but it's with Israel. And so Americans are paying attention to it. Americans are aware of it, cognizant of it. That's the big thing I see. And then there's, lingering stuff from last week, lingering conversations over the future of the Republican Party and what Liz Cheney could do. There's some news on Ukraine.
I think that's big. Yeah. I think the Liz Cheney thing is so massive. And I don't think, look, people have been watching it, but I don't think they've been giving it the gravity it deserves.
That's at least the biggest political event on the right this quarter.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Easy.
After the breach of the Capitol on January 6th, and the next bit of the year, that is showing where the Republican Party is going, isn't going, who's going to be in it, what kinds of things you got to say and support to be a core part of it.
Stay in it. Yeah. I mean, isn't that cancel culture?
Well, cancel culture is human culture. It's just whatever extreme you take it to, I think.
Yeah.
Because, people rally around the in-group and they fight the out-group, and that's a primitive definitional part of being human. But, then you really go overboard with it. And there's a very increasingly small in-group, increasingly large out-group, and it makes you better to feel that way. That you're on the inside, they're on the outside, and they're more them than you, but you can stand up to them anyway.
And there's also this thing of in my experience, when you're, let's say, doing a channel, for example, you have some people who are going to be to the left of you and some people who are to the right of you. And the people who are in the direction that you tend to go to push you in a direction. So it's like holding your shape is not always easy in that stuff. And so people tend to get hardened. So it's like the people who are Trumpers become that much more so. It becomes almost like a virtue signaling thing in regards to supporting Trump. And so it's like, it's not enough for Liz Cheney to vote 95% of the time with Trump.
Yeah.
She has to also say, no, really, he won the election too.
Well, and the other, I don't mean to fixate too much on this, but of course, the main thing about cancel culture that freaks people out, as far as I can tell, isn't just how sort of culturally totalitarian or something like that it seems to be. It's that it hits random people. It's not just that you're a politician and you get castigated or pushed out, excommunicated from modern politics because of something you said somewhat recently. It's not that. You made yourself a public figure. If you say something that buries you, that's on you at a certain point. But it's random members of the public, like owners of hair salons and random pizza boys or something like that, who get canceled over saying something or even doing something that shouldn't be quote unquote cancelable.
Yeah.
Like the modern form of exile, which used to be a punishment as serious as death. Anyway, we've apparently decided that that's okay to hand out willy-nilly on an ad hoc basis, depending on who you don't like any given day.
Social culture.
That is the social culture. Right? That's the point I wanted to make, is that it's applied to random people and who didn't decide to be public figures. Right. That's what people hate about it.
Yeah.
Or a lot of it, at least.
I mean, honestly, we're getting to the point where there is no such thing as a deviation between public and private. I mean, in real terms, like a person goes on Twitter, is that public? Or if the person goes on Facebook, is that public? It's called Facebook, right? Your face is to the world itself. and nobody really thinks about that stuff, even though any of those posts that the person could put can go viral at any moment. And that person all of a sudden becomes a celeb for something that they had no idea. Let's say a bunch of friends are at home. My wife and I, we may be watching a television show and we may say stuff entirely jokingly that if anybody was sitting there, be like, oh my God, that was so racist. Now, I would imagine everybody does this on some level when they're with their loved ones or friends. And I don't believe for a moment it's like it's a racist thing. It's I think it's a person thing. And yet, if a bunch of friends were doing that, they would say, oh my God, look at those people do that. All context is dropped. The person is vilified. All of their friends get identified. They're ostracized. Like all of this stuff happens within the context of no time. And context doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter what was going on in their heads. Doesn't really matter what they are in real life. None of that stuff matters. Only thing that matters is what they saw on Twitter. That 20-second clip. Their life is defined by that 20-second clip. Look, I don't know if that's what it's like to be in a psychically open society. I don't know what to call it. Like where
are you saying this is going to be the Sitch post Neuralink that everybody everywhere, you don't even need to say it. It can just be a thought of yours and it's up.
It could be a thought of yours.
Public consumption.
But maybe not to that degree of Neuralink, because I get the feeling that we have some aspect of us that we want to keep private. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a fight.
Well, but then why is politics everything? Why is it that that's the thing? I mean, at a certain point, your conversations with people are one of the first things that are expected to be private, kind of famously throughout history or something on a deep intrinsic level. Your ability to have a private communication is supposed to be private. Now, say you have that in a cafe instead of in a, behind closed doors. So you have it in a slightly more public space, like Facebook, for instance, where often people's profiles are still not public. They're still just restricted to, access to their friends. Does that make it more public? I don't think so. I don't think so. But it's a scale, certainly. You're walking the line down a little bit and just changing your standard. And then you can do that again and again and again and again until what's the line between somebody who decides to be on TV, somebody who's like, I want to be a TV anchor, and they go for that as a career, and somebody whose tweet accidentally goes viral. Mm-hmm. Are they both vying in the same square, or have they just accidentally overlapped in this weird realm of publicity? I
mean, the thing is, it's social media. Like, that's the rub. Like, when you put a tweet out, you have to know that tweet could go viral. Or when you put that thing out on Facebook, you have to know. And it's like, what is it like for a kid to grow up in that?
But does that mean that you're asking for it ever?
Doesn't mean you're asking for it.
Of course not.
No.
So what are you supposed to do? Just keep a diary?
Yes.
And only communicate with yourself in private?
Yes. I mean, if you
really think about that, what does that do to? Of course, what does that do to society?
I know, but if you don't want, I mean, look, it's social media. Like, I don't know how you train your kid or somebody else to engage, because you can't have it both ways. Either I'm putting this out and I want the world to be able to engage with it, or I'm putting it out and I don't want the world to engage with it. I thought
in liberal society, quote unquote, and I don't mean liberal in the modern political sense, of course, but just in the deeper sense of, free communication, free thought, modern society. In liberal society, I thought we've moved past the point at which you were in Sunday school and any contrary thought you had, anything that stood up to the way of the world as you saw it being perpetrated by the current hierarchy in society, You had, back then, you would have had to put it in your diary. If you spoke it too loudly,
Yes.
a friend of yours would say, keep that to yourself.
Yes.
That kind of thing. I thought we'd moved out of that, but apparently that's what we want.
Was it The Wanderer? Was the poem I was reading or listening to the other day where it's like a man is supposed to keep his thoughts to himself? Like, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Let's close it. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you could do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I watched with a grim curiosity over the weekend about what was taking place in the Middle East. In many respects, when I look out around the world, I feel a certain degree of responsibility, especially as an American, especially tax day being the last day today. I need to file my taxes today, but tax day being the day, well, my taxes are going into the pockets of Israelis. My tax money is going into the bullets, the Iron Dome shielding that they're using to knock down rockets and missiles, and the weaponry that they're using to kill and knock down apartment buildings. I'm responsible. We are collectively, on some level, responsible. The president of the United States being asked about this, the White House put out. Today, the president spoke with Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu, and he reaffirmed his strong support for Israel's right to defend itself against rocket attacks from Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza, and condemned these indiscriminate attacks on Israel. One group has nuclear weapons, one group has a navy, one group has an air force, and the other group doesn't have any of those things. Apparently, they got their hands on real rockets, but for the most part, majorly ineffective in comparison to, the missiles, the Navy, and the Air Force. Jen Psaki put out, we have communicated directly with the Israelis that ensuring the safety and security of journalists and independent media is paramount responsibility. Now, this, I'm not quite sure around the time, either before or after this, Israel shot down an AP building. Israel said that Hamas was hiding in the building with the AP press. Now, considering the AP press had been there for years, this doesn't necessarily seem to be true, and yet this is what they are running with. The AP made the point of saying this will make it far more difficult to cover Israel. No, duh. That seems to be the point, right? It will be more difficult to cover Israel. Here's another thing. For the third time in a week, the United States is blocking a joint statement from the Security Council calling for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Two diplomats involved tells Times of Israel. The statement was introduced by Norway, Tunisia, and China following today's emergency session on the escalation in Israel and Gaza, and criticized both sides for the ongoing violence. The United States mission did not respond to requests for comment on the matter. During the open meeting, U.S. Ambassador of the UN said the United States is, quote, working tirelessly exploring diplomatic channels to try and bring this conflict to an end, unquote. 14 to 15 Security Council members sought to issue a joint statement which requires unanimous approval after closed emergency meetings on Monday and Wednesday. The statement would have called for an immediate ceasefire while condemning both sides for the violence. When council members moved to hold another meeting at the end of last week, the United States mission blocked the effort for the same reason, saying it preferred to wait until Tuesday. After pressure from multiple missions, the United States agreed to move up the meeting to Sunday. Asked after today's meeting if the United States planned to back the joint statement being drafted, an official at the United States mission told Times of Israel, quote, right now, we're focused on intensive diplomatic efforts underway, including those by Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, discussed at today's security meeting. Dodging and covering as Israel kills and massacres. Again, this is not a conflict. This is basically one side that is occupying and expropriating more and more land. And in the context of doing that, has all sorts of weaponry, hell, even nuclear weapons. And the U.S. right now, even in the Security Council, not just in words from the standpoint of the administration, even in the Security Council itself, is protecting Israel. This is not just now. Let's play the clip of Biden. This is going back to like the 80s that Biden had this particular temperament, and now he's president, and he's going to do exactly what he was thinking about doing when he was a candidate. Let's play the clip.
If we look at the Middle East, I think it's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
Joe Biden used to be a lot more honest. That is the prevailing thought. And whether or not that thought is changing or not, I mean, you have AOC, you have Rashid Tlaib, you have some of the people who are in Congress, maybe 10 people who are pushing back on this notion. I still suspect that this is the thing that is running through the halls of Congress, especially among neocons. If Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create another colony in the Middle East to make up for it. Let's play this clip of Nancy Pelosi, because it's not just Biden, it's also Pelosi. Let's play the clip.
I have said to people when they ask me if this Capitol crumbled to the ground, the one thing that would remain is our commitment to our aid, and I don't even call it aid, our cooperation with Israel.
But should it? Should it? Think about what she's saying for the moment. It could crumble to the ground, and yet our support for Israel would remain. I had a conversation with an Israeli when I was on a bungee jumping trip, actually. We were in Nepal. And I was making the point that Hillary Clinton, during that time, I think she was running for office. And it was during that time where I made the point to him, like, look, I don't have this interest in fighting a war for your country. And he's like, well, we don't really need you to fight a war for the country. I said, well, it seems as if you do. And it seems that if Hillary Clinton is basically willing to fight to the last dead American. They are massacring people in Palestine right now. And the response of the United States, especially from the people who are in power, are basically to let it ride. Shane, do you see any change in this? Like, we had the person on, I can't think of the gentleman's name, but he made the point that he said he saw a change in tenor in Washington around this specific issue. I mean, there are, what, maybe 10 people out of all of the Democrats and Republicans? I mean, am I missing something? I mean, maybe that's more than what there used to be. I don't know. What do you see on this issue? Like, do you see this issue changing over the course of time that you've been paying attention to it?
I don't know. I'm not the person to know. There are people who know more about this that we've had on the show recently, but they've said different things. So I believe the guest you're referring to is Jonathan Katab, who we spoke with last week, who said that from the public's perspective, 99% of the people, the ability to have conversations, critical conversations, or positive ones, but across lines, just have them out in the public square, apparently that has increased. Yeah. Contra the culture war stuff, against what you might expect from conversation in many ways, latitudes shrinking around what you're able to say in public. Anyway, Jonathan said that had changed. Then we had another guest on, Miko Paulette, who said nothing has changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Now that's not even just in the halls of Washington. That's among the public. And if you look at the people who are critical of Israel, they tend to be on the more, naturally, they tend to be slightly more on the fringes of politics, like the progressives, for instance, in Congress. As we're going to be talking about later, they're already some of the least bipartisan people. They're some of the most in their corner. And then if you look at what their base does to them, with progressives specifically, they castigate them for not being radical enough. Yeah. That's inevitably what happens. And so in this sort of internal congressional politics, they're constantly stuck. Well, what do I do? Do I appeal to my base who wants me to move further to the left, but is going to make me a less practical leader in Washington because I simply won't be able to get as much done as if I play along, or do I just sort of go along to get along, make whatever marginal changes I can? And
I think you've seen this for yourself. Like, and it's not that you're on the left or anything, but just from the window to which I give in looking at the stuff from the standpoint of the left, you've seen how they've gone after AOC, especially the force to vote stuff.
We had a whole cast of folks going after her on our show and in our chat rooms and all that.
Yes, and even going after me for basically making a point of saying, I think
you're defending it too much.
Right. Tone, dude. How can you? Why are you so angry about tone?
Why are you tone policing?
Yeah, why are you tone policing?
That was the response.
And so we're gonna have a conversation about that today because I love the fact that the article came out talking about she was one of the most radical members of Congress,
along with the rest of the squad.
Yes.
Which is where I'm going with that. My point in bringing that up is that if they are the people who are opposed to Israel and they're already seen as on the fringes, then that tells you a little bit about where. I'm not saying that's the issue but that's where Congress is. I'm not saying that's the issue that drives them out of the running or whatever in terms of being able to get politics done in Congress. But
strangely enough, it's the fault line. I mean, if you notice,
it's one of them.
Like
it's a big one.
They have tried to basically supplement themselves in with the Democratic Party this go round, and this issue has been the thing where they've popped. I mean, Pocan, Sanders put out an article, like a whole thing, and I think it was in the Washington Post. Dershowitz called him a self-hating Jew, which is racist or anti-Semitic on some level. Well, this is
one of those interesting issues that's a connection of both foreign policy and more woke politics, what you might think of as woke politics, having to do with cultural issues, whether it's race, gender, or religion in some cases. And anyway, this is one of the through lines where it connects politics traditionally, which wouldn't be tainted necessarily by the culture war stuff, and the culture war stuff directly with allegations of anti-Semitism floating around. And then, of course, the ridiculousness of accusing a Jew, somebody who's Jewish, of being anti-Semitic simply for opposing Israel is not only
so anti-Semitic.
It is pretty anti-Semitic.
I mean, you're basically saying that he has some kind of foreign allegiance here, that he should have some foreign allegiance. Yeah. Sanders is born in America. But
then, of course, the question is, but what do you do? What exactly are you proposing for Israel? Are you saying that the Jews who currently live in that region should leave? Because no, I'm not saying that everybody who lives there should just suddenly go. And I'm not even sure where I land on this issue, other than I want there to be a conversation that takes into account both sides' interest and puts them on the table eloquently, continuously, and over the long run, so that we can have some dialogue on this and actually figure something out. Because it feels like the conversation does get stuck at, oh, this is a bit of a third rail. It's kind of
It's not a third rail. I mean, if you and I are in a negotiation, and in the context of that negotiation, I have somebody who says, look, I'm going to be a fair arbiter in this. And you says, great. And I'm going to, not just fair arbiter, you don't have a choice. Either way, you're going to accept me either way. And within the context of that, I'm giving this guy billions of dollars. And yes, I'm giving them all of this weaponry. And yes, I'm giving them nuclear weapons. However, I'm still going to be a fair arbiter in this.
Well, that sounds great. I would take that if I genuinely thought that they were going to be a fair arbiter.
But that's my point. How are they going to be a fair arbiter after giving all this stuff away? And it's like they're telling you, like, look, I know we're giving them all this stuff, but we're being fair. And it's like, yeah, but they're stealing more of our land. Yeah, I know, but we're trying to get a negotiation going. Like, it's that the entire way through. It's such a...
You're talking about the United States sort of supreme role in maintaining stuff.
It maintains the stuff, and not just maintains it, it puts everybody else away. We'll take care of it.
That's what changes, though.
It's a theft of land.
But over the course of however long, the United States seems to be weakening. It seems to be pulling its influence back in some key areas. We talk about this all the time, so I don't want to beat the horse on this one. But, we pull back a little bit. Other nations sort of pick up the slack or do what they do.
Are the Native Americans ever going to get their land back?
I don't know.
No. The answer is no. Because it's a temporal issue. You have a temporal amount of time in order to kind of take that territory. And the moment that you take it, you can establish it. It's that. That's my concern about it. But we have Elijah. So let's do this. We're going to continue this conversation. You guys are joined by Fault Lines, Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with Elijah Magnier. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We've been having a conversation about what's been taking place in Israel and Palestine right now. Israel struck the Gaza Strip again on Monday. This is the second week of, you could say, strikes, where they've been basically taking down apartment buildings and using military equipment to take down residential properties. Several Israelis have been killed in some of the missile strikes, but basically it is a grotesquely uneven matchup, to put it mildly. To have a conversation about the difficulties in covering a war such as this, we're joined with Elijah Magnier. He's a veteran war correspondent, and you can find his reporting on elijahjm.wordpress.com. Elijah, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Same here. It's always a pleasure to have you, especially for something like this, with your particular experience as a war correspondent. As you know, and at this point, everybody knows because the AP has been screaming about it, that the building that the AP was in Gaza has basically been struck and shot down. And they made the point of saying this is going to make it that much more difficult to cover this quote-unquote conflict. And I suspect that on some level, that was the point, to make it that much more difficult to cover this conflict. And basically, the information that you get out of it is only coming from one source, which is basically Israel. How difficult is it to cover a conflict like this, especially in a country like Israel that basically is an apartheid state at this point? And if you disagree with any of this, please push back on it. But basically, the difficulties in covering a conflict like this, how would you have to go about it?
Actually, this is not something new. I remember in 1982 when I was covering the Israeli invasion of Beirut and Lebanon, of course, the Israeli artillery bombarded all the foreign offices, including mine. I was working at that time for the Italian news agency. They bombarded the United Press International, AP, everybody. And the reason is when you live in a city that is under bombardment, you have to write about it, and you have to write what do you see, what do you feel. You are under siege like everybody else. You feel the fear like everybody else, and you hear the bombardment coming, and you have, particularly in the case of Gaza, no place to go because there aren't no shelters there. People are not allowed to have concrete and have steel for reconstruction. There are a kind of concentration camp of the size of 368 square kilometers, where they have no access to the sea, but according to what the Israelis allow, they have no airport, and the crossing into the other part outside Gaza or into Egypt is moderated by the Egyptian and the Israelis and can open and close according to the mood and the politics of Israel. Therefore, it is extremely difficult not to write what's happening, particularly when you have the information in front of you with the pictures and with the hospitals telling you that there are 58 children have been killed, 29 women are also killed, and you have a couple of thousands of wounded, some of them in a very critical condition that you can go and see. How can you not write about it? And of course, the Israelis will be upset because on their hand, they have 9 to 10 people who've lost their life. But what a comparison here. I don't understand how 58 children, 29 women can allow Israel to defend themselves, and these people represent danger to Israel's security.
Well, I think it comes from the Iron Dome thing. I mean, if Israel didn't have an Iron Dome, and you have to add it into the calculus because I'm not sure that so many rockets would be launched right now if they didn't have one. In other words, if every one of those rockets were able to hit, but I don't know. That's another question. The point is, there have been thousands of rockets fired that they have managed to mostly take down. And so there's this weird sense of constant latent threat without nearly as much death as you would get if those rockets were able to hit the ground. But the issue of Israel leveling this media building, there's some things that are weird to me about it, and they're probably pretty weird to anyone, such as, isn't that kind of a blatant form of aggression and a bad PR move that Israel wouldn't want to make necessarily, destroying a press building? It almost seems like a thumb in the nose explicitly of the discourse that would go on around what's happening here with what Israel is doing. But from the other side of it, a little bit more critically maybe, does it actually slow down the press's ability to do its work? In other words, me as a journalist, do I need to be in that room if I'm trying to work to cover what's going on in Gaza from the Gazan side? Or can I just do it from anywhere, from anywhere with Wi-Fi in Gaza with access to obviously electricity and the internet? Do I need that building? What's the point here? Or is it, what do you think is behind the rhetoric, the veil of the rhetoric over this being the side of militants who I guess would also be using many other sites across Gaza? Elijah, what's your take?
Actually, as journalists, we believe that we have a kind of immunity because we are doing our job to report and inform the population. And we believe the building where we are in is well known to the Israelis because the Israelis wipe every single corner of the city that they think it is considered a source of danger. Therefore, they know exactly where the embassies are, where the journalists live, where their offices are, etc. Secondly, you equip yourself with USB, with electronics and a private generator because the city the infrastructure is going to be bombed, and you may not have electricity to continue running your internet connection, your computers, etc. Therefore, your setup where you are, you have the backup, and you have a small bed where you can sleep either on the floor or in a corner because maybe you have a curfew in the evening and you don't want to go around. Therefore, you think this is a kind of security for you, particularly when you do not represent a physical danger to any of the side that are the belligerent that are fighting their war. So it is really deliberate from any party involved, in this case Israel, to bomb these offices, particularly when there are the AP and Al Jazeera, and both are very well-known media that are transmitting in that particular building where there are private generators, and they are equipped to function in case of lack of electricity. But I would like to answer your question about the Iron Dome. Yes, you have a very valid point here. However, the Israelis told us that they've sent 160 jet F-35 and F-16 to bomb 365 square kilometers. There is no doubt that Israel has the best military in the Middle East and in many countries in the world. So what's the point in sending all your almighty force to bomb a small area when everything has started because the Israelis stormed into one of the Palestinian holy mosque at al-aqsa, and they wanted to ethnic cleansing the Palestinian families, 38 families that are living in the area of East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, and to replace them by settlers. So this is how everything has started. It didn't start with Gaza launching bomb. It has started with the law of castle doctrine or self-defense or stand your ground that in the United States is very well known to defend your home, even if you want to use a deadly force.
Well, with the exception of Palestinians. Everybody can do that with the exception of Palestinians. Everybody has the right to stand their ground because you're right. This has to do with evictions. This has to do with basically a theft of land and a defensive theft of land. And that seems to be magnificently ignored by either Biden or the Pelosi's of the world, or, the Jen Psaki's of the world, the United States, as it talks about this very specific issue. Israel has a right to defend itself. However, Palestine doesn't. It's a very bizarre phenomena in the way that we talk about it here. But you hit on something. If Israel knows every inch of that area, then why would they bomb a media center? Because that would mean that it's intentional. What would be the point of intentionally bombing a media center? Because Shane is right. If they do that, the bad press associated with that looks like there would be somewhat of a disincentive for them to do it. But you made the point that they've done it once before, that this seems to be old hand, or basically almost policy in the contest in when there's basically putting down a rebellion of sorts. Why would they do that? What would be the reason and rationale for something like that?
3 reasons. First of all, the Israelis do not give a lot of attention to the international laws. Secondly, there is no accountability. And the third reason is you just need to see what the Associated Press and Al Jazeera have been broadcasting and writing to understand that this pleases Israel and that affects the general opinion. And they would like really to give a warning to the other media, telling them this can happen to you. And they didn't understand that the more you bomb the media, the more aggressive it's going to be. And journalists will continue writing without having self-control on other news. They will write even more the reality from different angles, because sometimes we do write the reality, always, but from some angles, but not all the angles. And here you drop all your defenses and you say, well, this is exactly what is happening, and Israel is responsible for that.
But Elijah, what's not included in that list of 3 items there is what I'm guessing Israel, views as its core justification here, its core rationale, which is the whole human shield thing. The idea that you have some protected forces who are sort of giving cover to Hamas militants that Israel would want to strike, which is how they would justify exactly this, that they're Hamas militants located in the building that are effectively using journalists as human shields while they continue to try to strike with, dozens, hundreds, thousands of rockets, Israeli territory. If I set aside, and I agree with your argument that Israel is unjustified in occupying these lands and in treating the Palestinian people as they are, and that they ignore international law because they are not accountable to it, because they have friends in high places and, specifically the U.S. But at the same time, that surely would be a 4th reason they're giving, that they're, that the press in this case is being used as a human shield by militants on the side of Hamas. Elijah, do you see that?
Well, actually, it is really very difficult to say that the Associated Press and Al Jazeera have been hiding or wherever they stay. It's full of Hamas and Islamic Jihad around them. As I said, Gaza is extremely small, and it is highly dense area with a 1.7 million population and 367 square kilometers. That's one. 2, we have a very strict rules when we work in any location to make sure that there are no hidden officers for groups or militia. And if there are, we have no right, according to our standards, to stay in the building on a location, and we need to leave immediately. So I don't think there are many people hiding. I don't think Israel is right by saying the Hamas are hiding behind civilians, particularly when Israel sent messages to the Associated Press and Al Jazeera saying, leave the offices, I'm going to bomb in 30 minutes, and they bomb in 25 minutes. Therefore, if there were Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and we want to agree with this reasoning, I think the Islamic Jihad and Hamas also leave the building 25 minutes before the bombing. So what's the point? The point is to inflict the largest damage on the infrastructure and to make sure that everybody is angry because of Hamas and Islamic Jihad are responding to the Israeli bombing. That is the aim, and that is the message.
Elijah, I'm curious about something. What is Hamas's end goal? So we often have a conversation about Israel just because they are the ones with nuclear weapons in the army and the navy and et cetera, and they're the ones that are basically taking down buildings. But from the standpoint of Hamas, they seem to have new rockets. There's that. But on top of that, what are they trying to get out of this? They're not going to win a military campaign against Israel. Now, on the secondary point, I absolutely and 1,000% understand the pushback, meaning you're stealing territory. There has to be some response to the theft of territory. By the same token, if you're not going to win it militarily, what is the point of the attacks? Meaning Hamas has to have something in mind when they're making the attacks. And that pushback is secondary to the pushback from Palestinians on some level, even though they're working in tandem with one another. What are they trying to accomplish here?
They're trying to, well, that is really a very good point and very good question. What Hamas is trying to accomplish is to tell the fellow Palestinians that you are no longer under the mercy of the Israeli almighty military power, that if Israel is going to attack the Palestinians in Jerusalem, dislodge them, ethnic cleansing, the whole capital of Jerusalem, we're going to defend you, and we're not here only to defend the district of Gaza. Gaza is going to be at the service of all Palestinians when Israel is abusing of its power and thinks that it can get away with it when the United States stands behind it and the United States stop any UN resolution that Israel disagree with or doesn't fit with the Israeli benefit. Therefore, Hamas and the Islamic Jihad are telling the people of Palestine, the Palestinians that are living there, and we saw the Palestinian of 1948 that carries in Israeli nationality, they are rising against the Israeli behavior because of the indiscrimination and because of the killing, unjustified killing of other Palestinians. This is the reaction of people who have lost their territory since 1948. And this is the reaction of Gaza, who's saying, I'm going to help you because we are all Palestinians, including the Israelis are Palestinians. They were all the people of Philistine. This is how what's written in the Bible and the Old Testament. They all come from the same land, from the same territory. But here we have a distinction in the modern world where we say the Israelis are kicking out the Palestinian who were the origin owner of the land in the last several centuries.
Well, okay, so Elijah, Jamarl last asked about where Hamas would want to take this. I guess another perspective, is that working? And then to the larger point of what this is actually producing, are you seeing a change in public opinion either among the elites of the world or among the general public who would be paying attention to these stories? It's partly spurred / triggered by similar conversations we had last week with other guests who were, some were a little bit more optimistic, some more pessimistic about whether or not people's minds are changing on this issue. But looking internationally, not talking about from the Palestinian perspective, although I'm also curious to hear if they're successfully being rallied by Hamas here. But is this shifting how the world views the issue of how Israel treats Palestine, Elijah?
There is a huge difference. First of all, Gaza is launching rockets with 40 to 70 kilos of explosive when Israel is launching missiles with 907 kilos of explosive. And Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza are saying, thank you very much, but it is not going to stop us. They disagree on the first ceasefire unless it includes the cessation of hostilities against the Palestinians. Hamas wants to achieve this, wants to implement a deterrence formula with the Israelis by telling them, do not kick out the Palestinians from their homes. We're going to defend it. They have raised the Palestinian cause because Palestinians made many mistakes. Palestinian leaders throughout the last few decades, they made tremendous mistakes in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Syria, everywhere. They took wrong decisions. Now the Palestinian cause is back on track. Now people are more attentive to what's happening in Palestine. The normalization with the Israelis between the Arab world and Israel failed, gave no results. All the power of Israel showed that it is weak in front of small rockets, even if they are numerous and intensify.
Well, but wait, what makes you say that, Elijah? Because it seems like the Iron Dome has effectively worked. It seems like you've had a ratio of over 10 to 1 Palestinian deaths to Israeli deaths. When you say Israel is weak, what makes you say that?
because Hamas and the Islamic Jihad launched 3,000 rockets, and if 90% of the Israeli Iron Dome was efficient, that is excellent. However, we still have 300 missiles and rockets that managed to break in and find their way in different Israeli cities. Therefore, that is more than enough for the Palestinians to say, we feel hurt. You can create damage with us, but you also feel what we feel.
But that is but that seems like a kind of lingering threat that just serves to perpetuate the conflict. That is 10 deaths of Israelis so far. Call it. I've seen accounts over that and under that, but even 300 rockets hitting. If that's the number of rockets that made it past the Iron Dome, made it past the screen, and they only killed 10 people, that seems like little bloodshed, which in my opinion is a good thing. Bloodshed is rarely a good thing, so less of it is good. But my point is, that seems like fairly weak pushback, just to be brutally honest. Elijah.
Actually, it is not, because the aim of the Palestinians is not to kill as many Israelis as possible, but to paralyze the economy and to say, as we live in a concentration camp, you will live under the ground in your shelters. We don't have shelter, but your economy, you will not continue living business as usual when we are bombed and we have hundreds of people killed and thousands wounded. You will suffer like us, and you will feel the fear. We will die, but you will feel the fear. At least some of the feeling that we have is passed on to you. It doesn't matter if you have 9 people who are killed, it's even better. But at least you stop working and you watch us how we are suffering caused by your military leaders.
Yeah, shared suffering, even if it's not necessarily on the same scale. The very fact that it's happening at all is in and of itself something, meaning it's a stick. It's not necessarily a great stick, but it's a stick that we have, and it's a stick that we're going to use in order to create some kind of balance. But is it creating a balance? I mean, what it seems like right now is 2 things could be taking place. Netanyahu, we're hearing, is trying to stay out of jail, for one, and trying to stay out of into power, for 2. And is potentially engaging in this kind of wag the dog action. This is happening simultaneously with the eviction of the property out of East Jerusalem, where they're basically trying to evict the various Palestinians. Is this a confluence of things? I mean, Hamas, like you said, trying to create a deterrent, or at the very least, this acknowledgement or this capability of force, or this capability of saying that we also can strike back, even if it's not necessarily of the same magnitude, the very fact that we can strike back in and of itself. But is Netanyahu basically willing to test that? I mean, because the argument that I think is being made here is that the number of Palestinians but Netanyahu is basically, there's a limit to the deaths that Netanyahu is willing to accept. And I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, the last time around, they killed, 2,000 Palestinians. I think it was like 80% of which were civilians. And in this situation, you have 1/3 of the people that have been killed are children. And the United States and Biden is basically protecting them, for one, and giving them a pass linguistically on the other. I mean, look, I understand this idea of trying to find some kind of weapon in order to hit your enemy with. And this is the weapon that Hamas has. And they're rockets at this point. These are not just, these look like actual missiles, not just rockets. So on some level, they've increased their technological capability. But how many deaths are equal in measure to this? And I'm asking this question in a weird way, but I hope you think you get what I'm getting at. Like, is it possible that Israel doesn't have a limit on the number of people that they're willing to kill in this pursuit? And even though Hamas is trying to make this point of like, we can protect you and we can have a deterrent, that basically the deterrent idea is dependent upon there being a limit on the number of deaths. And it's possible that Netanyahu doesn't have that limit. Does it make sense in regards to what I'm saying here? I guess I understand where Shane is getting at. I don't know if I entirely agree with his point, but I get where he's getting at. Is this a situation where the number of deaths is just not there? And we only have about 30 seconds. I apologize, but what are your thoughts?
Very quickly, if you look at 2006 Israeli war in Lebanon, there were 1,300 plus Lebanese killed and 100 Israeli killed. However, since 2006 until today, Hezbollah imposed deterrence on Israel. This is what Hamas is trying to reach, regardless of the number of deaths. The number of deaths is unimportant.
Elijah, we're going to have to call it here, but I totally get where you're coming from. The voice that you guys were listening to is Elijah Manier. He's a veteran war correspondent. You can find his reporting on ElijahJ.wordpress.com.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would mean you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's go into the headlines. In the news, more than 16,616 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, the fewest since June of last year, with just under 780 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 33,041 cases per day, a decrease of 33% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 37% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 47% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,967,351 people across the United States and has killed 585,572 people. Thailand has recorded its highest daily total of COVID infections since the pandemic began, 9,635 infections on Monday, with most of the new cases occurring among prisoners. The United Kingdom is significantly easing lockdowns in England, Wales, and most of Scotland as cases reach another low milestone on the roadmap out of the pandemic. Two areas of Scotland, Glasgow and Moray, would not have lockdowns lifted as cases are still significantly higher locally. Today is the deadline for taxes in America, with taxes due over a month late as part of the response to the pandemic. 80% of stations are out of gas in Washington, D.C. Almost 40% of stations in Virginia are out, over a third of gas out of Maryland. Prices of gasoline are at their highest they've been across the nation in over 7 years. This comes as Colonial Pipeline ransomware breach and subsequent pipeline shutdown drove panic buying of gas for cars, which is only ending as the pipeline was rebooted mid last week. Sunday was the deadliest day yet of the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with more than 2,000 rockets fired by Palestinian forces. So far, over 40 Palestinians were killed by Israel on Sunday, upwards of 180 Palestinians killed total. Around 10 Israelis have been killed. Israel said it had destroyed upwards of 9 miles of tunnels used by Hamas and Palestinian militants. Chile's center-right ruling coalition failed to secure a majority to decide on the draft of the new constitution of the country, failing to secure 1/3 of the vote necessary for blocking fundamental changes to the document, with candidates backed by the ruling coalition securing 1/5 of the votes. And last, the wife of Belgium's ambassador in South Korea has invoked diplomatic immunity after allegedly slapping a shop employee in Seoul who questioned her over suspected shoplifting. The woman had previously been hospitalized after suffering a stroke. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. That story always makes me chuckle. And I'm saying always, as always this morning.
Diplomatic immunity sounds pretty handy.
It does.
I would love some diplomatic immunity.
I would love some diplomatic immunity. I wonder, does that work if a cop pulls you over? Like, if as an African American, could you use that? Like, let's say for the moment that, I don't know, you came from an African country and they didn't know any better. They pull you out of the car. You're just hanging with your friends. You just have friends that are in America. Can you pull the diplomatic immunity card? And would the cop stop if you say so? I have diplomatic immunity. I'm from some other countries, Kenya or whatever. It's like, get on the ground, sir. I have diplomatic immunity for. Does that work? Would that be the bulwark? And if that cop does abuse that person, which probably will get abused pretty badly, is there a consequence?
I would love some immunity to diplomacy, like in the same way that you have like frost immunity or poison immunity, you know, in like these tabletop role playing games.
Yeah.
Heat immunity, fire immunity, immunity to diplomacy would be great. To rhetoric, to speech, I just think what I want without being swayed by other people. Or I would love some actual diplomatic immunity. I would love to be able to invoke diplomatic immunity, but I don't have to, because when I did mushrooms this weekend in D.C., they were completely decriminalized already, so I didn't need the use of diplomatic protection.
I love that. That's where, like, it's like when you think of, all right, what crime am I committing? Oh, right.
Nothing. There's nothing. Well, no, but here's the. This is actually a weird segue and insertion where I go personal. I did this weekend, and I'm going to tell you, it's a little bit frightening to see available legally, quasi-legally for purchase, not mushrooms, but like DMT vape carts,
really,
in the streets of DC.
No way.
Yes.
Are those real?
Those are. I would be guessing so, but
that's mind blowing.
It is literally.
Yeah. No pun intended.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. I need to find those. That's amazing.
Oh, there you go.
I didn't realize
it's easy. It's really easy to find. It's way too easy to find. This is all, again,
that's shocking, because DMT is not a, let's just hang out and do DMT.
It's not just like
it's not a party drug. It's a meditative, contemplative,
the God
molecule. My soul. Right.
The God molecule. Famously
the God molecule.
What the heck?
That book. Yeah, right. I have that book, actually. The DMT, the God molecule, where the guy was making this, his argument was basically that this connection between the mind and spirit, and that the DMT molecule was a way of connecting those two things. I mean, the thing is, people always say stuff like that, and they're looking for the connection between those things. If indeed this is this kind of virtual environment where this stuff connects and everything else, I don't think you would need all of that. I hear
you on
the
that
spirit, like the consciousness in and of itself would be the thing. But yeah, I'm shocked that they're selling that on the street.
So am I. Yes.
I'm shocked by that.
With the ease of consumption of a vape cart.
Of a vape cart.
Yeah.
Is that bad? Like, who's using that? Just
I don't
it's
know.
like, let's just hang out, man, and just
Well, but the
DMT stuff out.
The truly frightening thing is that it's the trips on DMT are short enough that you're able to use them during like a lunch break. So God forbid a friend of yours is going out and discovering the secrets of the universe while they're taking a break from filing papers.
Talking to machine elves and stuff like that, telling them about the universe.
It's 12:15 p.m. They're headed back to work and they're high as a kite.
That is astonishing. I did not know that.
No, I know.
So wait, is that legal here? I mean, shrooms...
It's decriminalized.
Yeah,
Initiative 81.
So all of this stuff is decriminalized.
Entheogens, which has a questionable legal boundary as far as I can tell. I saw people selling mushrooms easily. I saw people advertising peyote. I saw people advertising DMT vape carts.
Well, look, there's always the moment where it takes people to acclimate to that stuff.
Yes.
Like in the beginning, it's always a little weird, right? It's like when they, everybody can get healthcare. Great. Hospitals get rammed. Like everybody hits the hospital at once. Republicans are like, see, this is what you get when you get everybody. But give it a year.
Millions of people found out the true nature of their consciousness.
All at once.
All over the. Well, but it's also in the nation's. In the practically the world capital. At least it seemed like that for a while. Washington D.C. again, capital of the divided states of America, capital of the divided world. Whatever. If there's going to be a sudden expansion of consciousness or something,
wouldn't it be here?
Worst places to have it happen.
Yeah, man.
You could see an absolute metamorphosis in foreign policy. The Pentagon starts flying rainbows, and not just in CIA recruitment ads, but actual deep hippie symbology coming to life in the mind of the...
they used to be that way, or aspects of it. What is it? The remote viewing stuff. Have you seen the movie Men Who Stare at Goats?
I have.
All right. That's real, right? Like, elements of it was real. The CIA used to have this remote viewing program. Well, it wasn't the CIA. It was... I forget the name of the organization part of it. But their thought was, okay, the Russians or the Soviets are using mental stuff. And it was like, all right, maybe there's nothing to this, but we have to keep parity, so we have to also study this.
You're talking about the Defense Intelligence Agency, SRI International, Stargate Project.
Yes. Where they started doing remote viewing and stuff like that. They would put a guy in a room. They would tell that guy, here are the numbers or the coordinates, and the guy will pull information out of the ether. And they initially thought this was bogus until people started pulling information out of the ether. And this program went on for decades. Like, it wasn't like, okay, this doesn't work. It was like, oh my God.
And then when I brought up MK Ultra, you were like, I don't know about that, Shane.
Yeah, I mean, because sometimes they go further. Like, it's like
some people take MK Ultra to mean a lot of things that MK Ultra wasn't necessarily.
Right, and I don't know how far people mean when they say that stuff.
No, it's like it's a kind of it's one of those words. But no, I just mean there were experiments.
LSD experiments
included, but among many other things. Yeah, Albert Stubblebine, Major General Albert Stubblebine, I think is how you pronounce his last name, from Men Who Stare at Goats. A real figure, like a psychic headhunter, that kind of thing.
It's a fascinating stuff, man. Ingo Swann, oh man. When you get into the Ingo Swann stuff, that stuff gets so wild. Like where he talks about like Axelrod and all this other, like the spooky, the clandestine world of the stuff. Yeah, it's really wild. I mean, these guys were like hippies.
They were. They did it back in the 70s.
Yeah.
Think about what they could have done if they'd had access to DMT vape cards.
I mean, but see, for them, they needed to be aware.
Yeah, they know this wasn't drug oriented.
Yeah, this wasn't drug. Like, they needed to be, it's like, all right, you have a very specific mission in mind. Okay, what am I going to do? It's that.
Yeah.
Like, so these guys were psychic spies, even though they were spies in the real sense of the word. It's so bizarre. You'd be surprised at some of the stuff we've done to, like researching stuff out there, like in the cosmic ether and stuff like that. But no, the Minister Ghost thing was fascinating. Can you kill a goat with just your mind? Like, they didn't go that far into it, I don't think. But that, you can imagine, it was like the George Clooney character trying to kill a goat.
I don't think they ever actually managed to successfully kill a goat, which is a good thing. The poor goat. Also, based on, I'd forgotten about this. I was trying to remember who directed Men Who Stare at Goats, because for some reason it felt like a Coen Brothers film to me. It has some of that feeling, but it's based on a book by John Ronson. Who, have you ever seen Frank, the movie Frank?
No.
It's a good movie. Also coming from John Ronson.
Yeah,
is his name.
Anyway.
Same writer of the book that Men Who Stare at Goats. Again, it's fictionalized, but it's largely based on nonfiction. He's also I believe, the director of this movie, Frank. Good movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, true detour, but
very interesting. Very interesting. So let's look at this other one. So today, taxes in America. I have to file my taxes.
Same.
I always wait till the last minute, and then I hit the button on TurboTax and I send it off. I'm horrible at that, and so I'm glad this little tidbit is here.
I'm about there too, and it's good actually. I've been moving, so I have that as an excuse. Ideally I would have filed it before a week ago, but in the last week I've been moving, and so
all over the place.
All over the place. Yeah.
Okay, that's your excuse. I don't have one. I don't have a really good one. And my wife, she does it immediately. Like first part of the year, she's like, "Bing, done." She's always good at that stuff, and I'm horrible at this stuff.
That's a good way to be.
Yeah, she's definitely the organizer out of both of us. Gas. Now, I didn't realize it was this bad here. 80% of the gas in D.C. is out. That's astonishing.
Got up to like 88% there for a while. And this, you wouldn't even, it's part of the Eastern Seaboard broadly, but it's a bit further north than when we were talking with Mark Frost. He's based in Georgia, northern Georgia, which is right in the belt of where you would think would be affected. Georgia, gas stations in South Carolina were heavily affected, but it has reached all the way up here to D.C. It got up to 88% of gas stations out of gas, apparently.
But is that because people were slamming the gas?
Yeah, that's what it was. It was panic buying.
Panic buying.
All these people getting in on the rush of getting their gas before they think everybody else is going to buy it too.
Even though they would have had the gas.
It's weird.
If they wouldn't have panic bought.
This is where game theory and those, game theory specifically, that's where that starts to come in. The same logic that applies in this situation in its own weird way also applies in like war. The fear that everybody else is going to be attacking soon, or the fear of escalation, the fear that the other party is going to act first, and how you act in response to that. This sort of symmetrical modeling of behavior.
Yeah.
That's all game theory. And it applies there, it applies in war, it applies in, panic buying and gas shortages.
I got to get my gas before anybody else.
Exactly.
I don't know if the gas is going to be there. It's this issue of trust. And the breakdown of that trust. I mean, this is the whole issue of Federal Reserve. I mean, the issue of having money in the banks and all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, all of it based on the same idea. Left to his own devices. If people believe it's going to be there, people are not going to panic it. They're not going to run to it and try to pull as much as they can out of the stores and whatnot. That's a really, and also, the fact that this one pipeline was enough to destabilize all of this. One pipeline. Like, that's astonishing. Like that's so brittle. Like, and I know we hit it last week, but that is so brittle. Because if you think 80% of the gas is out in D.C., 80%, like that, 8 of the 10 gas stations you would go to would not have any gas in it. Basically that. That's how brittle our system is, where one of these pipelines could take down all of that.
Because some coders decided to get some ransom. Think about that.
And by the way, they paid the ransom.
And they did. And I'm constantly, millions of dollars, and I'm constantly reminded of how the fact that we do live in a cyberpunk reality.
Yes.
We live in a sort of post-mid-cyberpunk world where things are just gradually emerging, where you can't get gas because the entity that runs the pipelines was hacked into.
Yes.
And they were forced to pay a ransom to retrieve the use of effectively to be able to get them back up and have their system running securely again. That's effectively how that looked.
Yes.
They held the pipeline itself
at
hostage.
Ransom, right?
Exactly.
I'll shoot it if you don't give me money.
Exactly. What is that? We're already there. We're already there.
The pipeline gets it. Yeah, exactly. That's unfortunate, man. Look, those are your unfortunate headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. An interesting study came out, and I find the study to be interesting just because of the heat, the pressure that AOC have gotten from many on the left who don't consider her up to snuff, who've started calling her fraud squad as opposed to the squad, and for the most part, don't believe that her adversarial politics has been adversarial enough. Now, despite that, a study, this is by New York Post, AOC was declared the least bipartisan Democrat in the House of Representatives, according to a new study. I'll just quote it. The nonpartisan rankings are a joint project of the Lugar Center and Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy and are drawn from the official data on how a representative co-sponsors legislation with members of the opposing party. AOC ranked 427th out of 437 members of the House of a bipartisan score, well below the average of researchers established over a 28-year period. The 10 House members ranked lower than AOC for all Republicans. Now, is bipartisanship the thing that matters? And is AOC really the least or the most least bipartisan in Congress? To have a conversation with this, we're joined with Joel Siegel. Joel Siegel is, there we are, I apologize. Joel Siegel is a former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act. He's co-founder and National Director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network and nationwide multiracial climate action network. Joel, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us again.
Happy Monday. Good morning.
Absolutely. Happy Monday indeed. So AOC, I'm astonished by this on some level, because I remember all of the heat that AOC got for not being adversarial enough, not being partisan enough in regards to either the Medicare for all stuff, like the quote unquote forced vote stuff. And even from my standpoint, for the $15 an hour minimum wage stuff, meaning pushing it, you have the votes to do it. These guys are coming under huge pressure on both ends. On one side, they're getting pressure from, you would say, the Democratic Party to get, hey, you need to come together. We need to join hands. It needs to be kumbaya. We need to come together after Trump, et cetera, et cetera. By the same token, they're also getting pressure on the other end who's saying you're not adversarial enough. You're not representing the interests of the left, et cetera. This seems like a pressure cooker. Are these guys really the most, or the least, let's say it that way, partisan, or the most partisan in Congress? Because I don't think they are. But are they?
It's a great question. AOC's legislative director used to work for John Conyers. I would say I was maybe a mentor to him. And this guy is, typical progressive staffer on the Hill. I wouldn't put him in the category of far, far left, but very progressive. No, I think AOC is a progressive Democrat, and she's in the vein of probably Bernie Sanders and Roosevelt. I think because she's brown and Puerto Rican, there's so much racism against her, and I just really do believe it's because she's brown.
But is it racism, or is it when AOC first got in, she said we need to primary some folks? And look, I am one of those people like, yes. Because if indeed you want Medicare for all, if indeed you want a Green New Deal, and none of the people that are in there are for it, then those people either need to get on board or those people need to leave. So rational. But from the standpoint of Democrats, they looked at that as a shot across the bow. And in one sense, you had these guys who have said, okay, from here on out, the DCCC, the DSCC, they were basically trying to prevent people like AOC from coming in, saying they're going to blacklist anybody if they try to primary Democrats. I mean, on some level, you had the left that was pushing AOC because they just don't believe she was pushing hard enough. Is that an issue of her being brown, or is that an issue of them not believe? Like, for example, the $15 an hour minimum wage stuff. They had the power as a collective. I mean, it was only, 4 or 5 of them that could have stopped it. Now, I wasn't hitting her because she was brown. I was hitting her because she said she believed in the $15 an hour minimum wage stuff and didn't necessarily go to the mat for it with her other squad members in the same way that Joe Manchin would do it in a heartbeat. Joe Manchin would go out in a heartbeat. He would come out in his bathrobe. Yeah, I'm against that, and just walk away. And the squad who had the president saying he agreed with the $15 an hour minimum wage stuff didn't go through with it. They wouldn't do that. So when I'm hitting her for that, that's not me hitting her for that because she's brown or Puerto Rican. That's me hitting her for it because she said she was representing that. That's her policy that she wanted. And when it came down to it, despite the fact she was a waitress at one point, and she didn't make $15 an hour, she wouldn't go to the bat for it. That's what I'm getting at. So it's not everybody that's hitting her because she's brown and Puerto Rican, right?
Well, I was just making the point about the far-right Republican authoritarian party. But the Republican Party is now an authoritarian party led by Donald Trump. I was talking about more that wing, not the Democrats. In terms of the Democrats, no, I'm not going to defend AOC. I'm just going to tell you what I think might be happening with in the Congress. Mr. Conyers was to the left of the left.
Yeah.
That's who I worked with for 13 years, so I got to experience a lot of what AOC is going through just through watching Mr. Conyers. What happens is you've got AOC, who represents a very, very poor district. She's a very, very progressive person. The Democratic Party has been shaken up by Bernie Sanders, by Black Lives Matter, and I've been in rooms with Nancy Pelosi. She's a colleague. She's a friend of mine. When you're in a room with her and she tells you, okay, this is what we're going to do, I don't care how progressive the Democrat is. You don't go up against her. That's just the way that. Look, that's the science, and that's just the way it is.
Wait, you said science there. Wait, hang on a second.
It's science, yeah. When I say science, I really mean science or math.
There's a rule, a mechanism, a logic to it. I understand, but that sounds bad. That doesn't sound like a good political system, Joel. You got to kowtow to the most established politician. Sure sounds like how it has worked, but is that how it's supposed to work? And I don't mean to be too nitpicky or overly critical here.
No, I mean, listen, party unity. Now, if you're an activist and you're on the outside of Congress, it really looks like, well, these people are selling out. It's just the way it is, man. So if Pelosi takes a position, the way Pelosi operates is she wants to see if there are enough votes in the House to pass the bill, or if she knows that on the Senate side you're not going to get something passed, then what they'll do is they'll say, all right, in order to get this bill passed and do it for the greater good, we're going to take out X, but then we'll work on it as a standalone bill. Where I agree with both of you, or one of you, is that you really should go to the mat to a particular degree, but not at the expense of, for example, a COVID-19 relief package. If you can go ahead and do it on a standalone bill.
Well, but Joel, I hear what you're saying, but that seems like I know where a progressive would respond to this, which is that's exactly when you should be going to the mat.
Exactly.
When the stakes are most high. I can see Jamarl shaking over there in his seat, and I understand what he's shaking about. That's not the argument I would necessarily make, but I understand it. Where I would go with it is this, and you can respond to both if you want, Joel. There's a weird tautology here, something with Pelosi, speaking of logic, where you were referring to her, if you go to her and she says, this is what we're going to do, you don't push back on that too much because that's the order of things. But how can it be that she is simultaneously, she puts herself in a weird position, or she is put in a weird position as speaker, I suppose, because on the one hand, she's the person that everybody looks to in terms of what decision should we make. But at the same time, you're saying that she looks to everybody else for what decision are they supposed to make. She takes she reads the room in the Senate and says, okay, well, depending on how many votes we can get, but if everybody looks to her for whether or not they should vote for something, isn't that a tautology? Can't she decide what the Senate is going to want and then tell them that's what you guys want? It sounds like there's no head on that chicken or something. Joel, where do you fall on that?
No, I'm just trying to explain to you what I observed when I was there. I can tell you, Mr. Conyers, when we asked for a hearing on single payer during the Obamacare debate. And I remember Representative Henry Waxman said, I'm not going to give you the hearing. We had more votes and we had more co-sponsors on single payer in the history of any other universal health care bill. And even right now, the majority of the Congress and the Democratic and the House side is for Medicare for all, the majority. He said, I'm going to torpedo Obamacare. It'll never see the light of day unless you give me a hearing. And we got the hearing. So it is not the case that people capitulate. Usually what happens is on the left side, they go, I think internally you're not going to see the negotiations. They do go to the mat, and then they realize, okay, there's not enough votes for this provision. We don't want, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little disappointed in this discussion. I'll tell you why. Things are not black and white. If there's millions and millions of people who need a check, $2,000, $4,000, so they can get their rent paid and get their food and send their kids to school, but there's one provision that would stop that from happening, it really would defy logic or common sense or even good humanity to say, well, because I want $15 an hour, me.
But Joe, that works both ways.
See, go ahead and we're gonna be like little kids.
But Joe Manchin. Okay, doesn't that also apply to Joe Manchin? Joe Manchin had no issue with doing exactly what you're saying. $15 an hour was in the bill. It was in it. And Joe Manchin says, yeah, I'm not for that. Pulls it out. Joe Biden says, I am for it. And so you have the House and you have the president saying, I'm for it. Then you have members who are supposed to be, I mean, we're talking, this is not like modest. We're talking about like 40 million people who would get a raise on something like this. And we're talking about something that Joe Biden himself has said was a starvation wage. He says anything less than this, and people are starving. What does it mean for an individual or for a family or for a child to starve? Joe Biden went to a food bank, and he was talking to the people in the food bank. Joe Manchin had no issue in kicking that football. So how is it that all of a sudden it's childish for AOC and the squad to do this? But when Joe Manchin does it, it's something else.
I mean, I see your point. I'm just telling you, not how how I would legislate, or how I'm just telling you what goes on up there. Here's another more important question: what do they do now, and what do we do now? What do we do in the grassroots? In my opinion, I think we're going to have to go back to the politics of non-cooperation, the politics of civil disobedience. Whether it's the Congress, the Supreme Court, the General Assembly, where progressives are going. If we want $15 an hour, then the progressives are going to have to get organized around the $15 an hour, and by any peaceful means necessary, get it passed. Because we can have a discussion about what should have happened, but I think the discussion is, what do we do now? We cannot change the past. Do I think that the progressives should go further in terms of getting television coverage and briefings and hearings? Yes. Should they go to the mat? Yes. In my experience, which is now over 27 years, they will go to the mat to a point. The question is, where are progressives and where are they going in terms of the mat? I'm talking about the people. I'm talking about labor. If you can't live off $15 an hour. Absolutely. So to be progressive and truly revolutionary for the people, now we have to say, okay, let me ask you, I don't see any meetings right now about getting people $15 an hour. I haven't been on any national calls. I'm just saying now we have to rethink and get organized and do the $15 an hour by any means necessary. I know government contractors, I think, have to get $15 an hour. It is not far enough. Let me tell you about AOC. I really trust her implicitly. I think she's got excellent judgment, because what you don't want to do, and I'm going to close in a second, you don't want to be stupid. And stupid is when you go against the majority, even the progressive Democrats, then in the Congress, you are screwed, excuse my language, for the rest of your career. In other words, you don't want to render yourself ineffective because of the position that you take, because these people have much longer careers than one vote. Now, should the AOC and the squad right now go to the mat on $15 an hour? Absolutely.
The voice that you guys were listening to is Joel Siegel. He's a former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act. He's co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network, a nationwide multiracial climate action network. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're talking inside baseball, talking congressional politics with our guest, Joel Siegel. He's a former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, the Expanded and Improved Medicare for All bill. And he's also one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act, a.k.a. Obamacare. He is co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network, or JAM. That's a nationwide multiracial climate Action Network. Joel, I want to get right back into this conversation. Thank you again for being with us. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Often when we speak with you, I'm stuck on a line because we are usually fairly critical of politics and politicians on this show. And so my tendency is to be a little bit more derogatory, but I also want to be understanding to the extent to which that's useful, because obviously we are living under a political system practically by definition. But if you want to change politics, if you want to make things better and you see them fundamentally as bad, and I understand, you need to go along to get along to a certain extent. You need to give it a little to be able to get the change that you want in the system. But looking at what's happening, I can't help but feel that it's a little bit too high school-esque right now, that individual politicians and stakeholders inevitably need everybody else to go along with what they want in order to give anybody else what they want. And that seems dysfunctional to me. It seems like in a better political system, which we could get, it would be a little bit more in the other direction, where not everything was a notch on how much you're willing to support the status quo, and not every record was kept for the purpose of making sure that you fell into, party solidarity, whatever, but that there was a little bit more willingness to explore, to expand, to push for new strategies, that kind of thing. As somebody who's been in the beast for a long time, do you see me as right, wrong? How do you think we can get there, Joel?
It's a great question. I think until progressives unify under one umbrella, organize the unorganized, where progressives on the outside can match the power of the people on the inside, that's the equation that we have to start looking at. And Mandela proved you could change politics from organizing, on the outside robustly. So did, I would say, the anti-Vietnam War movement, the civil rights movement, into, I think, the universal health care movement. At one point, we had over 2,000 organizations. Connors and I were coordinating the whole thing. Obama just didn't wake up, eat cornflakes, and pass Obamacare. We spent over 11 years organizing the movement. That's the great equalizer when a member of Congress fears you to a degree where if they don't vote the way your constituents are demanding the way you vote, you're going to lose your job. And that's the power, that should be the litmus test of any movement. Do you have enough power to either get a bill passed or to kill a bill? And then if you don't meet that threshold, then you're going to see the same old in the Congress, where money influences the decisions, timidity, et cetera. And that is a question that people we don't want to have this discussion. I don't know why. And that's, if the majority of the country is about to become majority minority, and we've had 6 out of 7 presidents, I think, were Democratic, then that means we are now in the majority, but we're not roaring, we're whispering. And that's the problem. The progressives got to get organized.
From the standpoint...
They're dysfunctional. The progressives are dysfunctional. They're siloed. They're controlled by nonprofit grants. There's ego. It's ridiculous to me to having come from government and having led movements to see all this fragmentation. And if we don't get it together, we're going to lose the earth on climate change.
That seems intentional, though. That seems like that's driven by the Democrats. There's a trope in the progressive community that I say all this because I'm familiar with it, but I'm not a progressive. I don't consider myself such. But that Democrats effectively co-opt progressives at every turn, that progressive grassroots movements get going, that Democrats see where the wind is blowing on a sort of cultural fringe or vanguard of their movement. They co-opt those groups by creating nonprofits, and those nonprofits almost invariably, go somewhat in the direction that their founders wanted them to, but they kind of get co-opted. The co-optation is the name of the game there. What's your take on that, Joel?
Excellent. Another excellent question. I have to tell you, the grassroots progressive Democrats, I'm on calls all the time where they say Democratic Party does not represent me, and we're going to fight back through the grassroots. I was on a call this weekend where I heard that over and over again. There's a real revolution going on within the Democratic Party, and the revolution is between the donor class, the Democratic Party, those who give $100 or more, and progressive Democrats that really believe in the Bernie Sanders platform. Do I see groups being co-opted by the Democrats? Yes, that can happen. I also see a lot of groups that are very well funded that are not co-opted at all. Progressive Democrats of America, Black Lives Matter. I've seen many organizations that are not co-opted at all. So there's that dynamic too. There are just certain groups who are on the left, who are progressives, that cannot be co-opted. Do they have enough power and money right now? Are they organized? No. Are they getting there? Who knows? But yeah, there are NGOs in the Beltway who the money that they're getting though is usually from the 1% or the 5%, and that does have an impact on their advocacy, right? The fear that, okay, my donations from my nonprofit might dry up if we're too progressive. So yes, that dynamic, it does happen.
Yeah, that's always a hedge in regards to getting, I would imagine, anything accomplished or anything done, especially on the standpoint of the left. I mean, the right, there is no conflict in regards to action versus ideology. Whereas on the left, on some level, anybody that's in the 1% that's giving somebody cash on it's going against their own economic self-interest. So I understand where you're getting at with that. I want to move over for a moment to the Republican side of the aisle in regards to what I consider to be profound in regards to the way that this has been taking place and the Dick Cheney stuff. The Liz Cheney stuff. Liz Cheney ends up getting ousted. Now, Liz Cheney has a voting record with Trump with like 90%. But because she wasn't standing by this notion that Donald Trump won the race, that she was insufficient in regards to her leadership on the Republican side. Utterly astonishing. Let's play the clip. This is Cheney talking about her ouster and, talking about McCarthy and Stefanik being basically standing in line with Donald Trump, pushing this lie that Donald Trump somehow won the race. I want to get your take on this in a moment. Let's play the clip.
And I asked this about both McCarthy and Elise Stefanik. Are they being complicit in what you consider the Trump lies?
They are, and I'm not willing to do that. I think that there are some things that have to be bigger than party, that have to be bigger than partisanship. Our oath to the Constitution is one of those. I've worked in countries around the world where you don't have a peaceful transition of power. What's happening right now with Donald Trump and his continued attacks on the Constitution and the rule of law is dangerous, and we all have an obligation to stand up against that.
If the only changeover between the Republican Party was meaning we're going to change our tenor, in the same way that Joe Biden comes out and linguistically ticks to the left, well, Trump is doing something to the Republican Party. If this was entirely just in rhetoric or entirely just in this notion of, okay, we're going to be less interventionist, no issue. But this is premised on the idea that Trump somehow really won the race, which is a repudiation of the government of the United States outright. What's your take on this? I mean, you've been in government for a very long time. Have you ever seen anything like this where the party basically says, okay, we're going to change, and the thing that we're going to change in the line under is basically a guy that lost the race, and it's not so much policy, it's the fact that he won it, despite the fact that he lost it. Like, it's an astonishing thing to watch take place in regards to the party. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, in my lifetime, I'm 61. It's the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life, because as a Jewish person who lost half of my family in the Holocaust, my great-grandparents left here to escape authoritarianism in Russia. And the conscripting of young Jewish boys and men into the Tsar's army, they used to then take them to Siberia, and they would never be seen again. And I didn't come to this country to, my great-grandparents to live in an authoritarian America, but it's like Hitler said, I'm not comparing Hitler to Trump right now. I'm just talking about because I always, you get pounced when I say that. But here's what's analogous. Hitler said that the Jewish people were the reason why the Germans were in such bad shape economically, right, after World War I. It was a big lie. And then they said, yeah, it was the Jews. So whenever I see a major party talk about a big lie, then people believing that big lie, as a Jewish person, I get really, really scared. I think that we're in a national emergency. We have a party of Donald Trump that is authoritarian, number one. Number two, it's nativist, it's racist, it's stupid, it's dangerous. And, I've never seen anything like this. I never thought I would see anything like this. Quite frankly, I'm scared. And I think that we have to have a national discussion about what are we going to do about a party where you got members of Congress who are Republican who were saying the insurrectionists were no different than tourists.
I'm more feared of the fear, honestly. I mean, I'll put it like this. I think that the Patriot Act's passage was more totalitarian or authoritarian or whichever word you want to use. Both of them, but I would use the word totalitarian, far more totalitarian than what we saw on January 6th, partly because the breach of the Capitol was successfully repulsed, and none of the people that the breachers opposed, it was only the protesters that died effectively, is my point, at the hands of the protesters. Even Brian Sicknick, the officer who was, at first allegedly bludgeoned to death with a fire extinguisher, ended up dead from unrelated circumstances. Now, none of that is good. None of those deaths are good or justified, in my opinion. But at the same time, it was relatively ineffective. And I'm worried that we've glommed onto that idea that this was a major threat to our democracy when we've had many threats to democracies and significant ones at the hands of American leaders. What's worrying to me about the Trump thing is kind of what Jamarl said. I'll put it like this. Trump as a political figure is incentivized to claim that he won the election and that it was stolen from him, because it leaves his position at the head of the Republican Party more cemented than if he said, I lost. In this case, there's still a question, well, why couldn't you keep the election from being stolen? If you're that strong, if you're that effective of a political leader, you can ask, okay, well, why did you let it happen? But now he can say, I didn't lose. It was taken from me, and there's still a chance to take it back, that kind of thing. I'm worried that he followed that incentive either intentionally, in good faith or bad faith, whatever. Jamarl thinks it's more bad faith. I think it's more good faith that he's claiming the election was stolen from him. It doesn't leave our democracy in a good place. But the Patriot Act, just again, to use that as a recent example from the last couple of decades, that seems to me to have done more to harm our democracy than this did. But we got to close it out. Joel, thank you for the conversation. Hope it improved from your perspective as we kept going through it. Enjoyed having you on. For those listening, that was Joel Siegel, former congressional staffer, co-author of H.R. 676, that's the expanded and improved Medicare for All bill, and one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act, a.k.a. Obamacare. He's also co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network, or JAM. That's a nationwide multiracial climate action network. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, and we'll be back taking your calls, 202-521-1320, when we come back. Be right back.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking your calls in an open segment right now. 202-521-1320 is the number again. 202-521-1320. We have Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
I have two comments. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for taking my call. First of all, free Julian Assange. The BDS movement needs to be increased to put pressure on Israel government, not the people, but the government, to stop the false treatment of the Palestinians and push for a two-state solution. My second comment is dealing with the movement in 1985 when they dropped the bomb on a house in Philadelphia, killing 11 people. They're supposed to have a committee being informed to investigate it. This is what the members should do, is to ask for the UN Security Council, the same people that's meeting on Palestine, to send some observers over to watch the meeting in Philadelphia, just to be observers, and also to have transparency, to televise the meeting as to discuss the issues, so we can see what's the process, what's going on, so everything can be on board, and it won't. Hopefully, the Philadelphia government, the Pennsylvania government, the Philadelphia city, won't sweep anything underneath the rug, and you won't hear nothing from it again. But if you have observers there from the UN, because that was a tragedy that happened, because that was a genocide, then what that's going to do, that's going to make everything transparent, and hopefully things like that would never happen again in this country again. You know, you have the judge. You know, you're supposed to go to trial. You know, not to you don't supposed to have a bomb drop on your house, anything like that. That's wrong. So we need to invite the UN over here to watch that process in Philadelphia when they have their committee formed in the next coming months, hopefully.
Over 25 years later, Tarif, interesting point. Thanks for bringing that up. That it's interesting. It's just interesting. I wonder, Tarif, you're still there. Why did you bring that up? Why do you think that's important that we take a look at again now? You know,
because the U.S. has a history of doing certain things and swooping in on the world and hiding it from people. And it seems like the rest of the world forgets about it. Because if it's not in the media, in the U.S. media, then the world won't bring it up.
Well, yeah, because you originally, you first, when we were talking about the Armenian genocide, I think that was the first time that you brought up, I've heard you at least bring up the 1985 MOVE bombing, which again, bombing in Philadelphia of a residential building that was occupied at the time by members of this group, MOVE, sort of, you know, a more radical left-wing kind of anarcho-primitivist movement thing from what I've read about it. Anyway, that happened. People died, 11 deaths. And you first brought that up when we were talking about the Armenian genocide and how the Americans are often denied the scrutiny that we give to other countries when it comes to their human rights abuses, their, you know, fundamental wrongdoings. I understand the point there. Just wanted to check back in on that. Tarif, thank you for the call. Agreed, as always, on Julian Assange. We got Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, look, I'll echo Tyree. You know, obviously free Julian Assange and the BDS, but I say at this point, I'm free Palestine. They've been on occupation for over 50 years now. Probably actually go back to 1948, the truth be known. But look, I'd like to call in about the previous caller, Joel Siegel, or Siegel. Basically, you know, talking about the $1,400 bonus. It wasn't $2,000, it was $1,400. Well, just a quick maths on that. You know, you divide 2,000 by $7.25, which is the increase, and the average American has to work a 38-hour week for 7.25 weeks to earn $2,000 every year for the rest of his life, his working life, or their working life, or $1,400 is about 5 weeks. I think that makes a massive difference to the getting an extra $2,000 in your pay packet every 7.25 weeks for the rest of your working life. Also, Medicare for all, for everybody, would make a huge difference to the security of American families and poverty in that country. You don't have to legislate for it once, and it'd be done forever. And basically, you wouldn't have to go. And I think they should have gone to the mat. Obviously, you know, you hold up, Joe Manchin can do it. And I think the squad,
it's that.
All the progressives should come out and say, if you don't do it, then we'll primary against you. We'll come out, and because like 70% of Americans on Democrat and Republicans are for Medicare for all, and also over 70% of Americans are for the $15 minimum wage on the Democrat and Republican side.
Well, let's just take it from the standpoint of let's take Medicare for all off the table for the moment. I agree with you clearly, but let's take it off the table. $15 an hour minimum wage. AOC, and this gets to the thing I was going with Joel about. AOC had basically said we can push Joe Biden on things like the $15 an hour minimum wage, even if we can't push him on Medicare for all. This was some of the commentary that came around the forced to vote stuff. So Joel's point is, well, you don't want to be a pariah, and Pelosi gets you there, and basically there's all of this pressure and everything else that's exerted upon you and everything else for you to do X or Y. And your ideas and the things that you may want to do later on, those things are going to be crushed and everything else. I get it. I get what he's saying. By the same token, you can't tell me that you need to go to Matt, but not willing to go to Matt for something like that. Joe Manchin was willing to do that in a heartbeat. Joe Manchin didn't think twice about saying, yeah, I'm not for that. In his bathrobe and slippers, and just, you know, makes his vote, and then he goes back home. That's where he is. And so you have, well, wait a minute. If Manchin can do that, there's no issue with Manchin doing that, then what is the hedge from the standpoint of the squad? All of them in the capacity that they have, what, 5 of them or how many ever? You only needed like 3 or 4 votes in order to kill the COVID bill. And it's not so much that I love the fact that the COVID bill is being killed. It's more so that Joe Manchin didn't think one iota about killing that bill and about the number of people who weren't going to get the check, who weren't going to get the provisions that were put through that bill for the extra number of days. And at no point did they scream, oh, you're kicking food out of babies' mouths. Nobody screamed that at Joe Manchin. And yet, that was the first conversation that came up here. Whoa, man, I mean, people are poor. People don't have the food they need. Yeah, but Joe Manchin didn't have an issue with that. So why should Squad? This is what I mean by going to the mat. There are always going to be consequences for that stuff. There's never going to be, you know, you move your queen here and all of a sudden it's just a checkmate, because it's never going to be that way. There's always going to be some kind of negative flack, some negative consequences. That's what it means to go to the mat. And that very specific instance, $15 an hour. Think you're talking about like 40 million people that would be affected by that. If that's not something to go to the mat for, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. Thank you for the call, man. I appreciate it. Shane, Joel, those conversations with Joel are always interesting because it's hard to know where they're going to go. There are some things where I really agree with him on, there are other things that I don't. And in this conversation, it was slightly maddening because in one sense, it's, well, I mean, people need to eat and you can't take money from the COVID bill, and that's not something you want to go to the mat on. And then it's like within a few seconds later, got to go to the mat. And it's like, well, wait a minute.
Well, which is it?
We were just talking about going to the mat.
Who are you going to the mat against? Because when we've had people on, as you're progressive, you have effectively two choices, as far as I can tell. You can either go to the mat against the right or and ally with the Democrats, or you can go to go to the mat with the Democrats. Right. And the second is going to be seen as infighting,
yes,
and it's going to be used to marginalize you by the Democrats. And the first is going to be seen as happy suppliance by your base, who's like, but wait, why are you willing to join in with the rest of the Democrats to push back against everything that, frankly, everyone should, push back against something that, frankly, everyone should? Why are you not willing to advocate for our issues, for our concerns, the very things that we elect you to do?
For your own concerns.
And I hear that, and you can hear in Joel's responses, I don't like talking about people while they usually aren't here usually.
I'm not trying to take a shot at him.
No, I hear you. But
I think this is what we talked about when he was here.
He says both of this is exactly what we talked about. And he said sort of both of the things that you would expect. He said the responses from either corner. Right. But by putting both on the table, that doesn't actually tell you how you're supposed to respond in any given situation, or what you're supposed to do, or who they should be going to the mat against, or what justifies them going to the mat against the Republicans but not the Democrats in certain cases, and
or
not
one
other.
issue versus another.
Yeah, it's all arbitrary, and the whole thing is like again, it's just a social system. It's just a group of people who they have their in group, they have their out group. If you start to blend the boundaries between the two, then people start to get uncomfortable. If I were all of a sudden to get pissed at you for the conflict with Israel and Palestine, it would seem completely out of place. Yeah. And so I'm guessing for a lot of and it's not it's not an exact comparison, but I'm guessing for a lot of Democrats, if progressives are suddenly hounding them for not going after left-wing values hard enough, you can just look at the Republicans and be like, but look at the alternative.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's part of the internal cultural conversation. And somebody like Pelosi might feel like she is advocating to the best of her abilities for the left while working with a flock of cats or whatever, trying to herd all these hundreds of people to come to some agreement. That's probably how she feels about it. But does that actually justify doing so little?
She may think that way. Yeah, she may think that way. Oh, we have callers. Okay, yeah, she may think that way. But whether she thinks that way or not, it's secondary to what the squad is.
Yeah.
That's all. It's like they have their own, like Pelosi has her own idea of the world. Fair enough. Biden has his own idea of the world. Fair enough. The squad got in, $15 an hour minimum wage. We're going to get it. We didn't make it when we were working as a waitress. We want to make sure that the 40 million people get it. That's their thing.
I get why we have callers who get so pissed at Joel, because it's like he's close, but he's also far.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's like you're close enough where you get that there are things where you, let's go to the call.
We got him. Michael calling in from Sydney. Thank you for the call. Anthony calling in from Detroit. You're on. What's on your mind, Anthony?
Okay.
You're on, Anthony. What's going on, man? And a 1, and a 2, and I'm sorry, Anthony, please call back in later. Having some audio problems. Monica calling in from Richmond. We only got about a minute left, but I want to give it to you. Monica, what's on your mind?
All right. I'm fixing my McDonald's order at the drive-in, so I might be. Hold on. Basically, I wanted to say, I think, Shane, you're a little naive about Siegel's point at the end about the great lie. He said something like, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Because I'm not really an anti-Trump guy. I think he was largely rhetorically kind of a left populist, actually, that pushed the Republican Party slightly to the left, except on the core sort of constituent Republican issues of Israel.
Yeah, we talked about that. Anyway, make the case. How am I naive there?
Well, you're naive because what happened on the 6th was a symptom, and after the kind of censorship crackdown on the movement of 75 million people who voted for the guy, they've gone underground, and what he's done is he's turned it into, it's not even anti-politics. It's not anti-politics, which might happen if you lose an election. Now it's a kind of counter politics. It's almost, we say that he's authoritarian. the movement's growing, man. It's huge. It's emerging with Q in a big way. Once that horse leaves
Monica, I'm sorry, we've got to close. We've got to close out this hour. Feel free to call back in at 9:45 at the end of the show. I would be interested in hearing the follow-up to that case. I will defend it, man. I think the Democrats are at least as authoritarian, about just as authoritarian as Donald Trump could be, but they're in power right now, and I don't like the way that they're pushing back to what happened on January 6th, even though I don't like what happened on January 6th itself. Anyway, I went over time, though. We've got to close this out. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another hour of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more from across the disunited, the divided states of America and the surface of our increasingly fragmented globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Alrighty, I hope everybody's morning continues to go well. Let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, there were more than 16,616 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. That's the fewest since June of last year, almost a full year ago. There were just under 291 new deaths as well. Over the past week, there has been an average of 33,041 cases per day. That's a decrease of 33% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 37% of the American public has now been fully vaccinated, and 47% of residents have received at least one dose. And as of this morning, to give you the total numbers, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,967,350 people across the United States and killed about 585,570. The country of Thailand has recorded its highest daily total of COVID and pandemic began. That is 9,635 new infections recorded on Monday today, with most of the new cases occurring among prisoners. And the United Kingdom is significantly easing lockdowns in England, Wales, and most of Scotland, as cases there reached another low milestone. On the roadmap out of the pandemic. Two areas of Scotland, Glasgow and Moray will not have their lockdowns lifted as case numbers are still high locally. In national political news back here in the United States, today is the deadline for taxes in America, with taxes due over a month late from April 15th as a part of the U.S. government's response to the pandemic. In Washington, D.C., over 80% of stations are out of gas, down from 88% being out of gas. This coming on the tails of the Colonial Pipeline reopening after the almost 5,500 miles of pipeline were shut down following a ransomware attack, a cyber breach, basically, by a cyber criminal gang, which successfully managed to extract millions of dollars out of the company. In the process, they shut down the over 5,500 miles of pipeline, affecting much of the country, including gas prices across the nation, first hitting in Georgia and South Carolina very hard. Again, those high prices and low availability of gas has sort of metastasized across the eastern seaboard, and now 80% of stations in Washington, D.C. are out of gas. Almost 40% of stations in Virginia are out. About a third are out in Maryland, with prices at the highest they've been across the nation in over 7 years. Since 2014. The pipeline has since been restarted late last week, where people would have been expecting gas to be. Anyway, in international news, Sunday was the deadliest day yet in the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with more than 2,000 rockets fired by Palestinian forces so far. Upwards of 3,000, I've heard some say, as over 40 Palestinians were killed by Israel on Sunday, with upwards of 180 Palestinians killed total. Around 10 Israelis have been killed. Israel also said it had destroyed upwards of 9 miles of tunnels used by Hamas and Palestinian militants on Sunday, after on Saturday leveling an AP office, Associated Press office building, as Israel said it was housing Hamas militants. In other international news, Chile's center-right ruling coalition failed to secure a majority to decide on the draft of the new constitution for the country, failing to secure 1/3 of the votes necessary for blocking fundamental changes to the document, with candidates backing the ruling coalition securing only 1/5 of the votes. And in South Korea, the wife of Belgium's ambassador to South Korea has invoked diplomatic immunity after allegedly slapping a shop employee in Seoul, South Korea, who had questioned her over a suspected shoplifting. The woman who did the slapping, the wife of the Belgian ambassador, has said that she had been previously hospitalized after suffering a stroke. So what was a bad situation was already quickly worse. Anyway, those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, it is far from the most important story, but it's the one that we keep coming back to immediately after closing headlines, just because it's interesting. The wife of an ambassador invoking diplomatic immunity because the local police are suing her because she slapped a shopkeeper who accused her of stealing.
It's strangely uplifting. It oddly is. I think it's the smile that happens at the end of that story. Is like, she slapped her? Yes. And it's the diplomatic immunity that makes it work. Right. Right. The story doesn't work until that part. And she declared I think it's because diplomatic immunity is so
it's high level.
It's so high level. Yeah. It's so like you have this expectation that, these cops or the government of another country pulls up in black limos and pull the guy out, and then the guy steps out. I have diplomatic immunity, that type of thing. Not for slapping the devil out of a shopkeeper. Also, I want to point out one of my subscribers. Shout out to, what is this? Basil Hodge. Colonial Pipeline shut down operations not because anything was broken, but because they couldn't build customers. They couldn't build customers. So right here, new reports indicate that Colonial Pipeline decided to shut down the pipeline because of an inability to build customers after the billing system was compromised during the cyber ransomware attack.
That makes perfect sense. Well, because I heard that the first part of the breach was their HR department. I think we had a guest on the show. I think it was Charlotte Scheider late last week. It was talking about how the thing that they actually hacked was the HR department's part of the pipeline, a part of the internet system that they were using, and then the hackers were able to gain access to the other system. But if the pipeline can't extract money, there you go. What's the point of running it?
Then what's the point of oil if we can't get, if we can't get money out?
I hear you, and this is where you take
how screwed up that is.
The public-private partnership thing. You bring that into the conversation regularly, and this is one of the downsides.
You
with
allow the people to get the gas. If you need to try to build after the fact, fair enough.
Yeah,
but you don't
do that.
stop energy production. That's why I keep. Why do you think I keep saying energy production is a vital service, and that is not something that should be held up to the whims of this profit? It's
I hear
that.
you.
It's
I
that.
hear you.
That's a perfect example. Like, because under normal circumstances, if it's not maximization of profit as being the main thing, then you keep that gas going and you figure something up after the fact.
I hear you. And technically, maximization of profit is definitely part of what drove it here. But I guess I'm just cautious of scoring easy ideological points on what are fundamentally problems pervasive across our society, whether you're talking governments, business, whatever.
It's an ideological point. I think it's a straightforward point that, look, you could say this is ideological to me, and fair enough. But I would say that there's a practical component to what I'm saying here, in that there are systems that I consider to be vital. And look, this is a security thing in my head, so fair enough. But in my head, there's certain things that are just vital systems that state should manage.
Well, and I could back up that case. I mean, we're talking about the pipeline breach right now. It was just a few short months ago that you remember what happened in Texas with the winter storm that knocked all the natural gas extraction and delivery out of the state. And so, with some people, a lot of people lost power. That's thing one. Thing two, which drove the scandal following the winter storm, all of those people with those massive price bills.
Yeah, $20,000 in bills and
It's another case. And if I wanted to make your case for you, that was also, of course, a company doing that.
Right.
A company giving people tens of thousands of dollar gas bills as they suffered the worst effects of a winter storm.
I think you're thinking that this is a capitalism, socialism argument.
Yeah, I just get cautious of. I just get cautious
argument for me.
Yeah, those easy arguments. I hear you completely when you get into like this. There's a conversation to be had here. I'm just cautious of only criticizing the thing I don't like when there's an opportunity to criticize it, and not criticizing the things that I do like when they do things. But that's not what you're doing. That's not what you're doing.
Look, the opportunity presents itself where it's pointing out this is exactly what I mean when I say because what is the point of the energy production? The point of an energy production is ensuring that we have energy, to ensure that people aren't cold, people can get food and supplies, etc.
Or it's a lot of money for that one company.
Right, but that's secondary. At least it should be, but it's not. And that's, in this case, the company's like, oh, hey, our billing thing was compromised, so let's cut the gas.
Well, and this is, assuming that's true, it's particularly screwed up because, again, that doesn't actually affect, like, as far as I can tell, you can still do the pipeline.
Yeah.
You can still have the pipeline running, conveying gas where it needs to be, conveyed, that whole process. And then if worst comes to worst, and you lose the records of who you should be billing for what amount of gas, ideally at that point, you could go to some authority. You either cut the cost as the assumption, or you go to the government, you ask them for a subsidy. But do we want to pay this company for their screw up fundamentally? That's the conversation that would happen if we went down that road.
It says right here, it says the company halted operations because its billing system was compromised and that they were concerned that they wouldn't be able to figure out how much to bill customers for fuel they received, according to multiple CNN sources that have knowledge of the matter.
I hear you. No, and it's easy to hit them on that, but think for a second if they were to go through and they lost all records of who they should be billing. What would they do with that?
Let's say the worst.
They would go to the government.
All ability.
And would you be willing to give them would you be willing to reimburse them for that screw up, or is that on their end?
I don't know.
Is this weird, vague overlap of responsibility thing, because they're not just a company, they're also a fundamental service provider giving energy to people. And how do we get
rid of that vague responsibility thing?
You either fully nationalize it or you fully privatize it.
Exactly. But that's the point that I'm getting at. Like I don't come to this from this kind of, oh, capitalism is horrible, let's get rid of it. I come to this from the standpoint of there are dual responsibilities here. And in regards to dual responsibilities, there should really only be one. There are certain things that are just radically important. Energy is one of those things. Transportation is one of those things.
How do you build, so if you go with the nationalization thing for a moment, how do you build a productive sort of competition into government processes? Because there's the use of this is the libertarian argument, at least in one of its forms. The government has the sole right to the legitimate use of force in any given society. That seems maybe completely irrelevant, but what that means is they're able to, by fiat, set up a certain way that things can be, and then keep that thing in order until force is applied. I don't know how else to say it. They can create something that can only be dislodged by some outside violent agency. As long as they have the ability to maintain laws within their borders, they get to keep that system going. Right. So how do you build it into the place that system doesn't get corrupt and immediately co-opted by one or another vested interest who sets up their operations and then decides to keep going, even though there are better alternatives that independent people could come up with. Because that's the strength of capitalism. How do you build that into government?
But is that a strength of capitalism?
It's
You're basically talking about something that, look, I don't think there's anything necessarily inherently wrong with a particular system that has a capability that is not necessarily motivated entirely by this notion of appropriation of cash. In this situation, though, the issue is not maximization of cash, nor is the issue of preventing the maximization of cash. The issue is security. That's the point that I'm trying to nail down here. It's about whether or not you and your country and the people who are under that country are going to have certain things that they consider to be a vital interest, and a vital interest in such a way where it is not up for the whims of, let's say, maximization of profit or up to the whims of this type of stuff. It's just, we need to ensure that this is something that is maintained. And this kind of dual interest of, we can't charge our customers, so we can't give them energy. That's abysmal. That's horrendous. So those people have to go without energy for those days because of what? Because you can't get paid? I mean, no, energy is a vital interest to me. That's one of those things where it's like, as a government, as a country, that's something that should be protected, and it's something that we should, it's not up for dual whims to me. That's something that we as a society needs to enshrine. That's not a socialism thing. That's not even that's a nothing
very
thing.
Quickly goes there. Well, in modern politics, if you take the conversation there, it is socialism. That's where that conversation.
But so is the military. I mean, so is the police force. So is all sorts of things that are
maybe.
Quote,
no, but
is there police forces? Maybe.
Yeah, again,
the military, the police force is not a maybe. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, you can have some cops that might be, private prisons.
Even some of the most ardent. Again, if you take libertarians as the ideological extreme that is sort of defining this one end of this conversation, there are plenty of libertarians who, again, are willing to defend a police force as pretty much the only government agency to be funded by the government, because in their eyes, that is the justification for government. Is
the military.
Use of force, or the military, or the military. Police for domestic consumption, so to speak, military for foreign consumption, so to speak, aggression, whatever word you want to use there. But, you have these two different orientations. That is exactly what libertarians would defend, minarchists, and anybody who's willing to defend the sort of furthest extreme of that ideology. Gas, that's in the middle somewhere, and there are plenty of non-libertarians who would also say that shouldn't be completely public owned. And then there are plenty of people who say, well, yeah, it's exactly the kind of thing that should be completely nationalized. Anyway, these are all conversations.
Yeah, different conversations.
What seems inevitable to me, though, is that it's going to be both. Is that it's going to be both the government and individual corporations that own it, simply because that's what defines our current economic and political system. That's our model.
That's our model.
That's how it works.
But despite that being our model, shouldn't there be... Well, let me ask you this. Do you agree with me that there is a problem inherently where there's dual loyalties, that sometimes you make things for the sake of making those things, not for the sake of profit? Like medicine. I don't want medicine, like this guy has cancer, pay me. I want the medicine to be for the sake of the cancer. I mean, despite the fact that I know that somebody's making a profit out of it, I still want the priority of it to be for the healthcare. And that's the same thing with energy to me. It's like there are certain things that seem to get vital interest. If you want to build a pencil, fair enough. Have at it. Corporations, build all the pencils you want. Build all the cars you want. Build all of the, the toy, I don't know, cars or whatever. But when it comes to certain things, specific things, yeah, I do think there is a vital interest. As for this notion of development and everything else, I don't necessarily think development stops just because the government takes over a particular service.
Government can fund research and development, all that stuff.
I mean, if you talk about the internet, you talk about all those things.
But how am I, who or how am I to distinguish between what we should do in one case versus the other? We no longer have clean ideological arguments that either side can make. Or if you do have those arguments, they're going to be seen by pretty much everybody as, well, this side is saying this, that side is saying that.
That's unfortunate.
Who am I supposed to listen to?
It's not about who you're supposed to listen to.
We don't have any barometer or compass at this point.
It's about a pragmatic thing of what's the best choice going forward.
But how do you know what's the best? Isn't that a tautology?
It's not. There is no magic to that.
Exactly, which means it doesn't happen. There's no baseline.
There's no magic. Meaning you're stuck in a situation of trying to appraise. It's no different if you're playing chess and you're like, all right, what's my best move here? That's just the world. You don't get any better. There's some people who play at a 1700 level. There's some people who play at a 2200 level.
With chess, there are rules to the game, and there's a clear criterion for who wins and who loses. There is nothing like that in reality.
Yes, it is.
Who survives?
No, individual choice.
Oh, but then everything is permissible.
Yes.
But that's the whole...
I always tell you that. What do I always tell you?
I know,
everything is like there is no rules.
Okay,
none of it's real.
Okay, Aleister Crowley, I hear you.
I tell you that all the time.
But then there's no limit on who decides who wins.
That's
which
true.
Everything is boundaryless.
That's true.
It's not chess. It's something like an exploratory form of Go or something like this. I don't know.
Because each individual has their own conscience in regards to what they want to accomplish,
and they can each decide or define what's right for them.
Exactly. Or you can have groups of people that decide to define.
But then how the hell? Oh, well, then that's society. But then, again. There's only so far we can get into existentialism.
There's no wall. Like that's what I mean. There's no wall. There's
I hear you.
None of it's real. It's you have human boundary, and that human boundary is okay. What do we want, or what do we don't want in this moment? And you have some people who said this is what we want to accomplish, and they nail it in regards to what they want to accomplish. Now everybody else can say that's horrendous.
Well, but isn't it weird to think that just 60, 70 years ago, before postmodernism or whatever word you want to use to define the sort of free-floating subjective way of viewing values in politics, it seemed like for a while there were ideological camps that had clearly defined belief systems, knew whether they were getting them or not, were in open competition with each other. There was, maybe to the most extent in history, camps with ideas and the willingness to defend them, and ideas, not religious principles or convictions or vague philosophical tenets or belief in a king or something like that. There were sets of ideas that people, how did we get that?
Is there a difference between a religious belief and an ideological belief? And if so, what is it?
I've asked that question plenty of times myself, and I think that there is. I think that the principle with religious beliefs is that there is at some point a founder with a revelation, and a revelation that connects them to something outside of themselves, where there's something that was revealed to them by an agent or player. Anyway, it's philosophical, but with somebody who comes up with an ideology, those are, like all philosophy, the ideas that they're thinking about are ostensibly available to everyone. They're not acting as an intermediary.
It's not a secret.
It's not a secret that they only have access to. It's not something that was revealed to them by somebody else. Now, there are, border case religions, like Buddhism, for instance, where if you look at Siddhartha Gautama, he's not saying that somebody got in touch with him and told him all this stuff. He's saying he sat alone for a while and figured this out while dealing with suffering, that kind of thing. So they're border cases, but that would be my line. We need to go to a break, though.
Yeah, let's go to the break.
Let's go to the break. We'll be coming back with Ted Rall, continuing this conversation in a different direction. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist, syndicated columnist. We'll be talking with him again on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We've been having this conversation about, in addition to the Israel-Palestine conflict, or I should say occupation, the conversation about Liz Cheney. Now, I've seen this to be a very big, big deal. And some of the people on the left don't necessarily see it that way. Some of the people on the left think Liz Cheney is Liz Cheney. And nothing has fundamentally changed about Liz Cheney, even from the standpoint of foreign policy or anything else. I mean, she's voted with Trump 93% of the time, and yet she's on the outs. And the question is the most profound. Why is she on the outs? What is it that she is not doing that they require her to do, that all of these Republicans require her to do? Because the majority of Republicans, to the tune of like 60, 70, 80%, agree with this provision of kicking her or ousting her from the leadership of the Republican Party. She doesn't own up to Trump or Biden losing. And that is monstrous. Because what that means is that despite all of these guys being part of the Republican Party, being in the mechanism of government itself, they're still on some level repudiating that same government with that vote to ouster Cheney. This doesn't make Cheney an angel by any definition. Cheney is still Cheney. But it is very bizarre that an entirety of a political party will turn on that one specific issue and repudiate the government of the United States. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Ted, thank you for joining us. Thank you for welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Ted, I've been shocked by this on some level. You've had the Democratic Party take a rhetorical shift to the left. And on some level, it seems as if they realize, okay, competition with China. We've just had a putsch attempt against the Capitol. We've had protests all year. We've had COVID with nearly 600,000 people dying. Maybe we need to do something different. Maybe we need to do something different. Not to mention Trump won with, 30% of the people who voted for Obama shifting over to Trump. Maybe something is wrong. And so you get Biden with this kind of, I don't know what you want to call it. It's this language of the left on some level, even though we haven't necessarily seen anything from a real world physical matter reality policy standpoint in order to back up that language. And so we have one guy on the left doing that. Then on the Republican side, it's as if they recognize, okay, we can't compete with Joe Biden talking in the way that Joe Biden is talking. After all, it's just rhetoric. And yet we're talking about cancel culture. We're talking about school books. We're talking about all this other stuff because we can't compete with the language and what he is doing. And so they throw their lot behind Trump, thinking this guy got us more votes among blacks, among Hispanics. This guy was able to get X number of more votes and the working class. This seems to be the best case for us to go forward. Liz Cheney basically agreed with Trump, like 90% of the time. The only issue is, did Joe Biden win this race or not? Was Trump cheated in the race? And that seems to be the demarcation point. And I don't think people realize how dramatic that is. That's basically one of the political parties out of rank political opportunism in regards to donors, in regards to, support that they may get, choosing something that they know is false and is repudiating our election in the process. How do you see this? I mean, they are basically getting Lee Stefanik, and she's a moderate in regards to, her voting record. If the Republican moderate exists, she's one of them. And so it's not even from the standpoint of policy. This is something else. What is your thoughts? I mean, is this just idolatry? Like, what are we looking at here? Because I don't think I've seen it in regards to a political party acting this way, especially not the Republican Party.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things going on, as you've alluded to. And I think what is real, you have to kind of look at, the rhetoric and the lip service, which we see on both sides of the aisle, is one thing. And then there's what's actually going on behind the scenes. I mean, one thing I do want to push back against is the idea that this sort of behavior, questioning the results of an election and the legitimacy of the presidency, of the sitting president, even when it's pretty baseless, is not completely unprecedented. I mean, maybe the best example is 1960. There's a lot of Republicans who believed, and older Republicans who still believe, that JFK cheated and won Illinois by getting the graveyards, connected by the Chicago's daily political machine to vote for JFK. historians agree that that's probably not true. Illinois wouldn't have been enough to tip the election to Kennedy. He would have needed to win Texas as well, and there just weren't enough improprieties in Texas to make a difference there. And probably not even in Illinois. But Republicans definitely never thought JFK was legit because of that. And if you go back, there's always a lot of Democrats, me included, never accepted George W. Bush as legitimate after 2000 and the Supreme Court, ruling there. And if you go back to the 19th century, there's the Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel Tilden fiasco, the Compromise of 1876. It's not unprecedented. I think, what I was talking to a friend about this, about the idolatry for Trump, and they were kind of saying, well, what's this all about? Why aren't they moving on? And I was like, well, okay, so let's just say you're the party boss of the GOP with total power to choose who the figurehead of your party is. Who is it? I look around, I'm like, okay, it's not Ted Cruz, it's not Marco Rubio, it's certainly not Mitch McConnell, and you can cast around for some of the younger Turks, but there's no one with that stature, that level of charisma, that kind of bold-faced presence in the media world that Donald Trump has. He's the guy by default because. It's not just that he's sucked all the air out of the room ideologically, or the fact that he reinvented political campaigning in a way that's going to change things really for the foreseeable future. But it's the fact that he's got the biggest mouth, the biggest platform, and the biggest personality in the GOP. And until they have someone new to replace, effectively, you can't get rid of Saddam until you have someone else to put inside to replace him.
Well, okay, so I wanted to come back to the close of what you were saying earlier, because there's a way in which I could completely agree with you, and then there's a way in which I could completely disagree. Yes, this has happened before. Unlike what's happened before, though, obviously what happened on January 6th happened. You gave 3 examples earlier in American history, most of them within the last century, all of them within the last 150 years. Even that, these are all more recent events, slightly, and Trump's failure and the way that his supporters tried to take it back on January 6th. The fact that they're denying the results of the election may not be new, but the idea that there was an armed breach of the Capitol definitely is. And it seems like the response, again, maybe I'm out of touch, but the response has been proportionately serious and severe from the Democrats with, more and reactivated talk of domestic extremism and, a constant suppression. Trump's leadership of the party is weird because he's obviously in exile from Twitter, but even outside of Twitter, I don't hear from him much. And I was dumb enough, I think, to think that Trump wouldn't come back, that he was buried after January 6th. I didn't see, okay, people are just going to get past that. We're going to accept this. I kind of didn't think that our democracy would be willing to accept that, even Republicans, because I heard plenty of Republicans the day after saying, this is insane, this is ridiculous, I do not support it. They seem to be the majority of the people in the party. And yet, without really having to say much of anything, Donald Trump has consolidated his leadership. CPAC saw that very clearly, and he's still alive and kicking. Anyway, I didn't mean to nitpick too much with the whole January 6th thing, but that does seem to defy the trend here. And it seems to make it a lot more existential for Donald Trump. He doesn't want to concede. If he concedes, clearly he's admitting that he lost. And if he claims victory and claims that it was stolen, it's another kind of loss, but a much lesser one. And he can use that in 2024 clearly to say, I'm coming back. This is our chance to fight back. But Ted, without an ideology or a coherent political philosophy, do you see anybody else? You said that what brought people to him was charisma. He can't talk right now. I haven't really heard from him, so that charisma isn't doing much of anything. Is it just the name and the memory? Is this going to actually hold the Republicans together, or are we going to start to hear from Trump more, Ted?
Well, I think frankly, I think after the last 4 to 5 years, we all know what Donald Trump is about, and he's said plenty without, we're still processing it. There was a point when we were talking about him a few years ago where we noted one of his tactics was that he would create such a blizzard of policy statements and just random garbage coming out of his Twitter feed on a day-to-day basis that his opponents in the GOP and on the left couldn't respond because, just when you started to mobilize against one thing he'd say or do, he'd be on to the next thing. And so I think we're still kind of like when you have a slightly old computer with an outdated processor, the little pinwheel is just still spinning from what happened and went into the system from 2016 to January 6th. I think, social media companies did Trump a huge favor by deplatforming him. He's kind of, people who are familiar with Russian history were, Ivan the Terrible, before he got dictatorial powers, he retreated to his dacha in the forest. I mean, he disappeared, and it made people forget his worst qualities, and they wanted him back, and the nobles gave him the power that he wanted. I see that as a direct analogy to what's going on now. I mean, he is, he has incredible political instinct. We all know, we're very familiar with his many, many flaws of personality and policy. Too many to count. But I think we really underestimate his animal cunning. And one of the things that I think he realized early on as a showman is that you never admit that you're wrong. You never accept a defeat. You never admit that you lost, especially when you really lost. And his people recognize that. Basically, he just says whatever he wants to get his way. And that it doesn't mean anything by it. There's no honor there. It just doesn't matter. He's out there for the final result.
It's like the no spoon thing. It's like, regardless of what happens in reality, we don't have to acknowledge it. We don't have to own up to it. We just move. So it's like, no, we didn't win. We didn't lose the race. Not just didn't lose the race. Nothing happened on January 6th. Nothing. It's like this is weird politics where reality doesn't necessarily matter. But I want to transition a little bit to Gaza and Israel, since that's one of the other big stories, and what is taking place in the Democratic Party on this very specific issue. So you have AOC coming out, and this is interesting. A lot of people may not know this, but when AOC first came out, AOC would put out comments on her Twitter page about Israel and Palestine, being very critical of Israel. And once she got into politics, that went away. Not just went away. There's this great PBS, I think it was Fireline, with the woman asking AOC about Israel. AOC mistakenly says occupation, if I'm not mistaken. And the woman says, wait, you say occupation? And they say, like entirely froze on the issue where she was freaked out. I need to find that clip so you guys can see it. I don't know if Shade have seen it. It's the wildest clip because it gets across her reality of things in regards to what she's thinking versus what she feels like she could say. And you could see all of that taking place all at once with her just getting into Congress and her basically learning the ropes. Except for this. On this issue, not so much, where you have basically them shooting down apartment complexes, like back to back. And this is not, this kind of military. No, this is shooting down an apartment complex in a heavily, densely populated area. Well, AOC stepped up and saying, look, apartheid is not a democracy. The same thing with Ilhan. The same thing with Shalit Talab. Meaning all of these guys, for the most part, have gotten on the same page on this very specific issue, have broken away with this kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, solidarity with Democrats on this. From your time in looking at Congress and watching Congress, are you seeing a demarcation point, a departure here, and it's something different that was there before? I mean, we've been watching this, or I've been watching this for several years, but there have been people who have been paying attention to this issue far longer than I have. And I'm curious about whether or not there has been a change in regards to the tenor of Congress regarding this issue. Are you seeing the sands begin to move?
The sands are moving big time in public opinion. I mean, there's just no question there. And I do think that it's an interesting question. There's, on each side of the bell curve, there's people who are hard-bound defenders and critics of Israel. The left has been consistent on the real left has been consistently pro-Palestinian, for as long as I can remember, and the hard right has been the opposite. And where the movement's happening is really, amongst sort of the centrist Democrats. And the squad is particularly interesting because they are, they ran as progressives and democratic socialists, but now they have to make their way through Pelosi's Congress.
Right.
And so, there's only so much, as you alluded to, there's only so much that they were able to say. I think that their sort of increased boldness, especially AOC's, is a reflection of her sense that the polls are shifting against Israel now. I see it among my fellow political cartoonists. A lot more courage in criticizing Israel directly, mentioning the A word, apartheid, and being like less afraid of being called anti-Semitic, because you criticize Israel. And I think there's just a sense that there's this society's sort of shift in subtle ways. For years you could smoke in hospital wards. Now, you have to be outside in the rain 100 feet from the door. What happened? Why? It wasn't any one thing. It's just, the society just moved. And I think years and years and years of Israel, kind of engaging in very similar actions. The Gaza war of 2014 was in many ways more ferocious than this. You just basically have not, have just sort of added up, and we've arrived at a tipping point. I think in no particular order. It's the fact that Netanyahu has been around so long. It's the corruption charges that are obviously very highly credible. It's the fact that Israel doesn't even pay lip service anymore to the idea of a two-state solution. It doesn't seem like they're interested in peace. The fact that the suffering has just been going on for so long. There's been documentaries on television that have been widely seen about living in Gaza before all this happened. So it's just a bunch of stuff piling up on one side, and I think that's moving the needle. And,
but is that going to matter? But is that going to be? I'll put it like this, Ted. I think the Iraq War was the last time I saw some pushback against America's foreign policy. People taking to the streets and saying stuff. Now that didn't make any whit of difference. Obviously, we were there for another decade, and in Afghanistan for about another 2. But there was a widespread pushback against American foreign policy for a brief window of time there. That has faded since then. I can't think of anybody who's really seriously pushing back. I can't think of that many, unless you're in D.C. literally, where you have almost weekly protests, constantly small-scale protests against every issue on the face of this planet. Unless you're in D.C., I don't see protests against, for instance, America's dealings with ISIS, either for or against. I don't see significant pushbacks against how America's foreign policy has been going for the last, say, 20 years, almost that, maybe more like 17, 18, that kind of thing. My point is, it would be the first time in a long time, and I'm pretty skeptical that we're going to see it, and if we did see it, my guess is it would be limited, it would spur some limited conversation, but it wouldn't actually accomplish anything. Do you think the public opinion, the shift in public opinion that you're seeing, Ted, is going to amount to much?
Well, like on Wall Street, when you look at a stock price, there's the price that someone that is willing to buy for a stock, and then there's the number of shares someone's willing to buy. There's the depth of that support, as opposed to just that level of support. The needle is moving to the left on Israel, no question about it. But as you allude, is there strong opposition? Are people going to take to the streets? Are they going to brave tear gas to do it? There's no indication of that whatsoever. I think street protests right now and this coming summer will continue to be about Black Lives Matter and other identity politics related stuff and police violence. I don't think that this is going to really arouse widespread street opposition, and I think in large part because of what you said. In 2003, it was very big, very effective, very huge. This didn't make any difference. I think people remember that. But if people start to lose primaries and lose elections because they're on the wrong side of this issue,
but would it be Israel? I just don't see it becoming that big of an issue. Jamarl, what do you see?
Election.
Yeah,
Sanders versus Clinton. I don't know if you remember this. And Sanders versus Clinton, that was the first time I've ever seen Israel became an issue of politics, where Sanders is on the debate stage and he makes the point of saying, look, Israel shouldn't be allowed to, kill with impunity in the way that they do. That was the first time I had ever seen it on a debate stage where Clinton was on the defensive trying to explain for Israel against Sanders, who's hitting her on this front. It was a fascinating that was the New York debate, if I'm not mistaken. It was extremely combative.
But I can't help but think that like Israel would have to engage in chemical warfare. They would have to do something of that level.
Even then, Even
I'm pretty sure if they did that and that were widely reported in the Western press, that would become a big touchstone in American politics because we support them and nobody really is in the dark on that.
Is there a difference between somebody or a group? And Ted, I'll ask you this: between, let's say, 300 people dying in a chemical weapons strike versus 150 dying in a non-chemical weapons strike. Like, why is there a difference in those things? I don't understand the differences in those things.
Would it make a difference? What's your take, Ted?
Well, there's a historical resonance because of chemical weapons statutes, and everyone learns about the mustard gas use in the trenches of World War I, and that's still part of our historical education, limited though it may be. But dead is dead, right? I mean, the end results are the same. I mean, depleted uranium used in bombs used in Afghanistan, are just breathtakingly effective and kill hundreds of people at a time, but they're technically not nuclear weapons, but they sort of are.
Yeah.
So it's that's why politics are interesting, because there's so many gray areas here. But I do think that there's a distaste for this, and the question is, does Israel rise to the level of like the number one issue that everyone's talking about?
No.
I think the question has to do with how long it goes on. If the Israelis keep it up, then yeah, maybe. But if what probably will happen and always happens in the past is happens this time, they just go, they go another week or two, and then CNN goes on the air and says, and now the rebuilding begins, and that's it.
Yeah, no, but you're also talking on the scale of weeks or months here, where over the course of decades, I think what would change American public and political opinion is the shifting tides of political circumstances, different, as the United States' influence in the Middle East recedes, as Russia and China's influence in the region grows, as, countries like Iran and Syria have stronger friends in the region, and as Israel has weaker friends. I'm pretty sure that's going to drive some change in conversation without us ever really connecting the dots fully on a deep level. That's why our opinion on Israel has changed. But that is decades, like Jamarl is saying. That's a long time, not the scale of the conversation we're having. I mean, we've had this conversation a number of times on the show in the past week, so I don't want to beat the dead horse too much, but we haven't talked to you about that. When it comes to foreign policy, how do you see that changing our relationship with Israel? The changing fates in the Middle East? Federal.
Well, I mean, let's just say for the sake of argument that we were to distance ourselves or significantly reduce or even eliminate military aid to Israel. In the end, I don't think it would really change the fundamental nature of America's interactions with the Middle East. We would still have Israel as a sort of a de facto ally or partial client state. Our relations with Iran would probably be relatively unchanged. We would just have, a smaller bill to pay, $4 billion a year in aid to Israel. I think it would certainly over time reduce anti-Americanism and make us sort of less of a target because of the fact that those stun grenades, tear gas canisters, and planes are all made in USA. Yeah. It would be great if they weren't, and you certainly, that was one of the motivations for the 9/11 attacks, or certainly one of the justifications was U.S. support for Israel. I think it would be sort of a movement toward a less engaged, perhaps more positive interaction with the world, where we act more like a normal nation.
Let's see, like Joe Biden said, Israel is basically our attack dog. If it wasn't for Israel, we'd create it. That was his argument. And basically his point is it allows a certain bad cop in the Middle East of sorts in order to accomplish various objectives in that particular region of the world. And, if we weren't associated with the hip with them, like you said, the 9/11 stuff, like it's significant in so many ways. And the amount of time that we've spent basically assisting Israel in the appropriation of more land and everything else, us pulling away from them, I think the United States has a huge amount of gravitas in this situation, either pressing down on Israel, either pulling back support. I mean, the Security Council, for example, we've just defended him for the third time for a resolution in a very short period of time, not to mention the money that we give to weapons. I mean, I guess we can close it out on this, but the influence of the United States, I mean, our culpability here goes beyond just this kind of tacit protection. It goes into, it's so extensive in the areas and everything else. And let me, a separate question on this, Ted, because it was something I wanted to get to before we close out. Protests. You mentioned before we were having this conversation about the protests and everything else that you believe that that's what much of the conversation is going to be about going forward. Do you think those protests are going to restart the moment that the COVID restrictions are lifted? Meaning, do you think we go back into basically what was taking place at the end of last year?
I don't think the COVID restrictions have anything to do with it. I think the cops are going to do what cops always do. I think they're going to murder people of color without any reason whatsoever. And then the next time it happens, it's going to be back into the streets. I mean, does anyone really think that that police brutality is going to stop? I mean, so it's ongoing every single day. The system hasn't changed its stripes. So, I think we're just the next atrocity away from more protests.
Very good point. The Voice that you guys were listening to is Ted Rall, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Rall and read his cartoons at Rall.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are taking your calls. The phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, that is 202-521-1320. I actually want to come back on the point that Ted was making there. Again, we're taking your calls on what we've been talking about and more if you want to bring it up, 202-521-1320. But we closed by talking about BLM and the protests and whether those are changing as the country opens back up. Because if you remember, last year when we were talking about this, a lot of the conversation around it had to do with how much are these protests caused by these stimulus payments that Trump has been sending out.
Right.
Is there a weird perverse effect here where Trump, who clearly opposes the protests, is actually subsidizing them by giving money out to the American public at large as we deal with this ongoing medical crisis? We were talking about that, June, July last year, all that stuff was rolling through. What we talked about briefly a few weeks ago when we spoke with Kim Iverson, in a surprisingly not controversial, conversation that we had with her, appearance of hers, she brought up this this study, this research that was done looking at the impact of Black Lives Matter protests in big cities across the United States. And what the research she said, and I've looked at the paper, I've read the abstract, I've read bits of it, but it's like 60 pages long filled with math, and I haven't read the whole thing. Basically, the paper, she makes a claim that the paper makes a claim that from about 2014 to about 2019, before the pandemic starts, in the cities where there were extensive Black Lives Matter protests, police homicides dropped significantly, but regular homicides rose at a rate like 20 times that. So in other words, these are toy numbers, these are not exact, but the ratios are right. Say there were 300 saved police homicides. In other words, police didn't kill 300 people that they would have. The rate of total homicides in those same cities rose about 20 times that much. There were about 6,000 people being killed by other people as there were, lives saved. So in other words, 5,700 people died at the hands of random criminals, and 300 lives were saved out of that, in just to give a broad ratio, which means that Black Lives Matter has actually not been an effective protest movement. If what you're wanting to do is lower the total rate of people getting killed, and not just the total rate of people getting killed by cops, which is significant. And if that is reflective, if that study is accurate, and if that's a good summary of what's happened across the nation and not just in these big cities and not just during that time period, then that is not the right response. If the response to police killings is to lower police killings but increase killings by non-police by like 20 times the rate at which you're lowering police killings, then what that sets you up for is a vicious cycle where you have higher rates of crime. Some people are pushing for more policing. Other people are pushing for less policing. And what your response to dirty policing is just causes higher rates of homicide. It creates more of the problem, because then you're going to have other people advocating for more brutal policing. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? That you're going to push back against. I don't want to be too critical, and it's one study. I don't want to act as if that is the
study. And I need to even see the study in and of itself to figure out how they're gauging that.
Well, you can go read it. You just got to learn some statistics.
Yeah,
a lot of
I'm going to have to look up the study. I can't take necessarily the word from one study. Look, whether or not you had 13,000 people dying a day, and 3 people dying from cops killing them, cops still shouldn't be killing people, period. And, whatever that number is. It's also, I would love to see, and look, Black Lives Matter, it is having an impact, even if you want to say the impact is less cops killing people, but more people kill people. That's an impact.
That's a bad impact. I don't want that.
Well, it's an impact in the sense of what they're trying to accomplish of cops not killing people, I suppose.
If you could have it accomplished that cops killed 5 more people a year, and yet there were 0 homicides by regular citizens against other people, wouldn't you take that deal?
I wouldn't take that. Why would you be okay?
Because it would save a lot of lives.
I know, but you're okay with the state randomly killing people?
I can make the case for it.
You can make
the case for it. If you're saving an absolute number of lives, a lot of them.
I cannot make the case for the state killing X number of people to say, it's like, if the state kills 5, but it saves 6, will I be okay with that? It's
what
like,
if it saves 500?
Why would it be okay with the state killing people at all, Shane?
Because they're saving other lives. And you know it because you signed this magical deal that gives you omniscient knowledge of what the circumstances are.
I don't live in that magical world.
Well, no, of course, but you get the thought experiment. You get the point of
thought experiment, but that's not the way the world works. And so I don't know this magical formula where the state says, look, if you sign this list, like, for example, on Angel, one of the episodes, you had this being that made everybody kumbaya around the world peace. However, the being needed to eat people in order to make that work.
Exactly. It's the village monster.
Right. It's the village monster, right?
The primordial form of a mafia. We'll protect you.
We'll protect you.
As long as you pay up in some sacrifices. Some blood. I hear you.
That's basically the justification of the mob, or the justification of a terrorist saying, hey, we'll give you this, but we need to get this.
Well, but that's a lot of people's origin of the state in general. We got calls. Now we're getting into
the origin of the state
philosophy.
in general on some level. But anywhere you are is where you're at, right? Let's go to the callers.
And it seems like we took that deal. Humanity as a whole has taken the deal of living with.
We take the deal with capitalism, right?
Well, yeah, we take it with all sorts of things.
We take all sorts of things. The military, all sorts of stuff.
And all of a sudden,
it's a leaky bucket.
For me to propose it, I'm off bounds. But we live in the midst of those kinds of deals. We've signed those contracts, and we want to forget about them.
It depends on how. I guess it depends on how horrible the contract is.
How it's worded. Yeah. How small the small print is.
It's like you're always looking for another leader or another master.
Yeah.
Depending on what master.
To cover up the mistakes of the last. We got Nate calling in from Atlanta. Nate, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey. I did not draw these dots until literally while listening to y'all's program.
Well, thank you.
Glad to hear we had that impact on you. Which dots are they?
It's more so colonial, the pipeline that got a cyber attack.
Yeah,
it's the same pipeline that has the biggest oil spill in history right now. Over in North Carolina, especially, they went from it's only a few 1,000 gallons that were spilled to now it's 100,000. Now it's 1 million, and now they're getting
1.2 million gallons at a cracked pipeline in North Carolina. It's the largest gas spill in 20 years. I hadn't heard about this. Go on, Nate.
Mm-hmm. And they're going back to the drawing board again, so it could be even more. But it's the same company that's targeted by this by the
dark side. The cyber gang.
Yeah,
go for it though.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
That was all. Just very interesting.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that there was an oil spill going on at the exact same time.
I didn't realize that either. And now I'm thinking, is there some complicated protection racket? Maybe it's a conversation we're just having.
That is
this ransom.
No wonder they paid up. Give the dollars or else.
No, some complicated
gets it.
It's insurance scheme. No, I'm just joking. But where are you going, Jamarl?
And then you shoot part of the pipeline?
I don't know. You should have
doesn't let you know we're being serious about it.
If they can't stop that one oil spill, just cut it all out.
Right.
They got ransomware hacked.
That is rough, man. They are having a hard go of it.
Oh, well, they did it to themselves.
And we are apparently.
Well, apparently we are too. Yeah, we're the actual ones getting shot here with these higher gas prices. I drive a bike, so who am I to talk? I don't need to pay that nonsense. We got Anthony, who dropped right as we were about to go to him. And we have Brave calling from Atlanta. Anthony, feel free to call back. We do have time. Brave, talking about BLM. What's on your mind?
Real quick, incidentally, No Agenda, the No Agenda podcast, if everybody wants to check it out, did a kind of a deep dive into the pipeline deal this weekend on the Sunday show. So apparently the insurance company that insures that particular company for the pipeline, so apparently it was under their guidance, and I guess they took it over. They took over the operation. Was under their guidance. The pipeline was shut down, causing the lack of oil and gas to be able to go out to the populace.
So wait, Brave, I want to pause here for a second. You're saying that their insurance company recommended that they shut down to avoid liability payments, whatever. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess. So. I went directly to the No Agenda podcast. They did a pretty deep dive into it.
Cool.
With Adam Curry, yeah, but it was pretty interesting. On the Black Lives Matter, it was more of a question. I remember Kim Iverson being on for that, so I actually listened that day. Well, I was on time, but I listened that day. But I wasn't getting the correlation between the Black Lives Matter protests and how that caused the murders the civilian murders to increase.
You mean how exactly that causes that?
I have no idea either, Brave.
Yeah, Jamarl and I were kind of spitballing about what could be causing that back in the day, maybe a month ago after we had Kim on to talk about this. And I think it was over the weekend that we were talking about it, and we just got into what would be causing it? And some of the points that we brought up earlier, Brave, we were talking, if police are less willing to prosecute or get involved into crimes, if they're sort of holding themselves back.
Let's see, that's secondary. How would that cause a murder? Unless people think, okay, the cops aren't coming.
Because
that's
maybe
the only other thing I can think of.
Because maybe sometimes, and this is the obvious thing, cops do actually save lives. And then sometimes they take them. And you're stuck with both of those situations in which they can be a protective force and sometimes an oppressive force.
Do they save that many lives?
Well, that's the question.
I mean, you're talking about 10,000 lives. I don't buy it. I mean, it's just
6,000 lives across the nation over 5 years. What is that?
I'd have to
1,200 deaths a year.
It's one study, and I need to see that.
I hear you.
The inner workings of it, because it just seems so over the top. I don't know the mechanics of it.
Yeah, on average, 100 deaths a month distributed across all the states. 2 deaths a month per state. I know I'm getting a little bit too deep into the math here, but the idea that cops would prevent that.
Yeah, but these are specific in various areas of Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
So it's not across the entirety of the country.
it's not. Yeah, it's not representative.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting study. I mean, if this correlated with other studies,
And it is interesting, and it seems like it should be decisive. But maybe I'm an ostrich with this stuff, and I have my head stuck in the ground. But if the remedy and the protests themselves are obviously not the remedy, so I don't want to overly simplify. But if the thing that you're doing in response to the problem actually causes more problems, that could be a step down the road while you figure out what you should be doing and you kind of rejigger, or it could be just a bad call. And I don't want to say that it is, and I'm not. Again, the protests are valid in their own way. But anyway, we've got to close today's show out. You guys have been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I want to thank our engineer. I want to thank our callers. I want to thank our guests. I want to thank our producer, new one included, Austin Pelly. We also want to thank engineer Andre and you, and Jamarl Thomas, my co-host, but also you for listening to today's show. Thank you, everybody. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. See you again tomorrow morning. Signing off.